During the mid-90s, WWE was on the verge of bankruptcy thanks to the rise of WCW and top stars leaving the company. However, during its darkest times, WWE bounced back in epic fashion and cemented itself as the world's #1 company for professional wrestling. We got the rise of megastars like Rock and Austin, the birth of DX, Undertaker and Kane's supernatural saga, the best WrestleMania of all time, some of the craziest moments ever seen on TV, along with wild storylines and feuds that wouldn't be sanctioned today. Even after the Attitude Era, the company kept the momentum going into the Ruthless Aggression Era with stars like John Cena, Randy Orton, Batista, Edge, and gave us some of the fondest memories of our childhood and teenage years. In this video, we're revisiting the entire golden age of WWE, from the birth of the Attitude Era to the peak of Ruthless Aggression, from the rise of Austin to the coronation of Cena, from the destruction of Kane to the Age of Orton. Grab some snack and sit back because this is a 2-hour recap of WWE's greatest years, starting from 1997. A year that saw Kane emerge from hell to confront his brother, when Survivor Series ended with the most controversial finish in wrestling history, when Stone Cold Steve Austin began his meteoric rise to the top of the industry, when the first Hell in a Cell match redefined brutality, when Vince McMahon transformed from announcer to the greatest villain the business had ever seen, when DX made parents hide the remote from their kids, when Rocky shed his babyface persona and became The Rock. And these are just some of the things that happened in the crazy year of 1997. From a creative standpoint, 1997 was the most important year in WWE history. It's the year that changed the world of pro wrestling forever. But what exactly made this year so transformative? What were the rivalries, double turns, and backstage controversies that would redefine the company forever? Let's turn back the clock and revisit the craziest year in WWE history. Heading into 1997, the WWF found itself in a desperate fight for survival. WCW had been demolishing them in the ratings war ever since the introduction of the New World Order in the summer of 1996. Shawn Michaels, despite being the top guy and delivering consistently incredible matches, felt the weight of the company's struggles on his shoulders. Just weeks after regaining the WWF Championship at the Royal Rumble, Michaels would deliver his infamous promo where he lost his smile and vacate the championship. The official reason was a knee injury that required time off, but the backstage rumor, one that Bret Hart loudly voiced, was that Shawn was ducking their inevitable rematch at WrestleMania 13. With the Heartbreak Kid out of action, most fans thought this would finally be Bret Hart's time to carry the company as its undisputed top babyface. But 1997 had different plans. Instead of Bret Hart's coronation, the year would witness the meteoric rise of a beer-drinking, foul-mouthed, authority-defying rebel who would transform not just the WWF, but professional wrestling itself. After winning the 1996 King of the Ring tournament, Austin cut his infamous Austin 3:16 promo that changed the trajectory of his career. But Stone Cold's journey to becoming the face of pro wrestling truly began in 1997. At the 1997 Royal Rumble, Austin entered at number 5 and lasted until the very end, where Bret Hart eliminated him over the top rope. But the referees were distracted and didn't see the elimination. In true Stone Cold fashion, Austin slid back into the ring and dumped out Vader, The Undertaker, and Bret Hart himself to steal the victory. Bret Hart was furious, and rightfully so. He went on Raw the following night and cut a promo announcing he was quitting the WWF, tired of being screwed over by Austin, Shawn Michaels, and Vince McMahon himself. But WWF President Gorilla Monsoon convinced Hart to return by booking a fatal 4-way match at In Your House, giving Austin, Vader, The Undertaker, and Bret another chance to earn the WrestleMania main event. When Shawn vacated the title after the Rumble, this match became for the championship itself. Bret would win that night, capturing his 4th WWF championship, but just like everything else in 1997, it wouldn't last. The very next night on Raw, Psycho Sid regained the title thanks to interference from Stone Cold, giving Bret yet another reason to complain about his treatment, and complain he did. Throughout early 1997, Bret Hart transformed from the respected veteran into a bitter, whining heel. His complaints were completely justified from a logical standpoint, but wrestling fans don't always respond to logic. They respond to attitude, charisma, and rebellion. Stone Cold had all three in spades, and every time Bret pointed out his rule-breaking antics, it only made Austin cooler by comparison. The stage was set for WrestleMania 13 in Chicago, where Bret Hart and Steve Austin would face each other in a submission match that would go down in history. At WrestleMania 13, Austin and Bret beat the hell out of each other in a brutal war that lasted over 22 minutes. The key moment came towards the end when Bret locked in the sharpshooter while Austin's face was a crimson mask. Austin eventually passed out from the blood loss, giving Bret the victory. But while Bret won the match, Austin won the war. Chicago went home that night having witnessed wrestling history, a double turn so perfectly executed that both men's careers would never be the same. However, the feud between Austin and Hart didn't end at WrestleMania. It intensified. Bret reformed the Hart Foundation, who were heroes in Canada and villains in America. Austin became their chief antagonist, the beer-drinking American hero who would defend his country's honor. Their rivalry culminated in a brutal street fight which further established Austin as the toughest SOB in the WWF. But Austin's rise hit a devastating speed bump at SummerSlam when Owen Hart, attempting a sit-down tombstone piledriver, accidentally broke Austin's neck. Doctors told him his career might be over, but Stone Cold refused to listen. He'd missed some time, but nothing, not a broken neck, not doctor's orders, not common sense, would stop the rise of the Texas Rattlesnake in the WWF. By the end of 1997, despite the injury, Austin would return and position himself as the company's next megastar. The Austin era was coming, and nobody could stop it. But while Austin was bulldozing his way to the top of the WWF, the company was simultaneously crafting a supernatural saga that would become one of the most popular storylines in history. The Undertaker had been the WWF's resident phenom since 1990, but in 1997, the dead man's past came back to haunt him in the form of a brother he thought had died in a fire decades earlier. The story began with The Undertaker's longtime manager Paul Bearer, who had guided the phenom for years. Following his title win at WrestleMania 13, Bearer attempted to rejoin Taker as his manager. When Taker refused, Bearer claimed to possess a dark secret from Undertaker's past. When The Undertaker refused to bend to Bearer's will, the vengeful manager began aligning himself with Undertaker's most dangerous rival, Mankind. In April, Taker and Mankind faced off with Bearer at ringside. Undertaker overcame the numbers game, but Bearer's threats continued to hang over him like a dark cloud. By the summer, Bret Hart had emerged as the top heel in the company, which led to an unlikely feud with The Undertaker. These two veterans with completely different styles were booked to collide at SummerSlam for the WWF Championship. But this match had another crucial ingredient that made it unpredictable: the involvement of Shawn Michaels as the special guest referee. Shawn had been lurking around WWF television since losing his smile, making occasional appearances but not wrestling. His selection as referee for the SummerSlam main event immediately raised eyebrows, given his hatred for Bret Hart. Throughout the match, Michaels appeared to be calling it down the middle, but in the closing moments, Shawn accidentally struck The Undertaker with a steel chair that had been intended for Bret Hart. The miscue cost the dead man his championship, with Hart escaping SummerSlam as the new WWF champion. The Undertaker was furious. He'd been screwed out of his title by the Heartbreak Kid, whether intentionally or not, and he wanted revenge. This set up a feud between two of the WWF's biggest stars, both of whom had been babyfaces for the majority of their careers. But this time, Shawn Michaels wasn't coming back as a hero. When HBK returned to active competition, it was as the leader of D-Generation X, the most rebellious and controversial faction the WWF had ever produced. D-Generation X, consisting of Shawn Michaels, Triple H, Chyna, and Rick Rude, represented everything the Attitude Era would become: crude, disrespectful, and completely unapologetic about breaking every rule in the book. Their treatment of The Undertaker was particularly ruthless. DX would regularly jump the dead man, beating him down with the numbers advantage while mocking his supernatural persona. The animosity between Undertaker and Shawn Michaels reached its boiling point at Bad Blood in October, where the two would face off in the first-ever Hell in a Cell match. For 30 minutes, Undertaker dominated Shawn Michaels and used the demonic structure to systematically dismantle the leader of D-Generation X. But just when it appeared the Undertaker would finally get his definitive victory over Shawn Michaels, the lights went out. A nightmare from Taker's past was coming back to haunt him. After months of threats, Bearer had revealed Undertaker's darkest secret. He had a brother, and that brother was alive. His name was Kane, and he was coming for revenge. As darkness engulfed the arena, an ominous music started playing. The lights went red. And then, in one of the most spectacular debuts in wrestling history, Kane ripped the door off the Hell in a Cell. Kane entered the cell, stared at his brother for a long moment, and then delivered a devastating tombstone piledriver to The Undertaker. Shawn Michaels, barely conscious, draped an arm over the dead man for the 3 count, but nobody cared about the match result anymore. Kane had arrived, and the WWF would never be the same. The Brothers of Destruction storyline had begun, and it would become one of the most important sagas in wrestling history. But while Kane and Undertaker's personal saga unfolded on the screen, behind the scenes, a perfect storm of politics, personal grudges, and ego clashes was brewing that would lead to the most controversial finish in WWE history. The Montreal Screwjob changed the course of the Monday Night Wars forever, and the roots of the Screwjob trace back to the complicated relationship between Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels. Their backstage confrontations had become increasingly hostile throughout 1997, with both men refusing to back down or show respect to the other. But personal animosity wasn't the only issue. The WWF's financial struggles in 1997 had pushed the company dangerously close to bankruptcy. Vince McMahon, desperate to cut costs, approached Bret Hart about his lucrative contract and admitted he could no longer afford to honor it. McMahon encouraged Bret to negotiate with WCW, where Eric Bischoff was more than happy to offer the Hitman a massive deal. There was just one problem, though. Bret Hart was still the WWF champion, and he absolutely refused to lose the title to Shawn Michaels, especially in Canada. Bret proposed several alternatives. He'd lose the title the next night on Raw, he'd lose it at the next pay-per-view, he'd lose it to anyone except Shawn Michaels. Hell, he'd even forfeit the championship or get disqualified at Survivor Series. Vince McMahon listened to these proposals and, at least outwardly, seemed to agree. Bret was told they'd do a disqualification finish at Survivor Series that would protect both men while setting up a title change down the road. Bret believed he and Vince had an understanding, but Vince McMahon was lying. Behind the scenes, McMahon had already made the decision to take the title off Bret at Survivor Series. The fear, whether justified or paranoid, was that Bret might show up on Nitro with the WWF Championship, humiliating Vince's company on live television the same way Alundra Blaze had done with the Women's Championship. McMahon couldn't risk it, so he devised a plan to legitimately screw Bret Hart out of the championship. At Survivor Series 1997, the main event pitted WWF champion Bret Hart against Shawn Michaels, with the agreed-upon disqualification finish supposedly locked in. For the first 9 minutes, the match unfolded like any other high-profile main event. But then, Shawn Michaels locked Bret Hart in his own finishing move, the sharpshooter, in the center of the ring. Bret wasn't supposed to tap out. The plan, as far as he knew, was for the match to break down into chaos. But as Shawn locked in the sharpshooter, Vince McMahon shouted at the ref to ring the damn bell. The referee immediately called for the bell, and the ring announcer announced that Shawn Michaels was the new WWF champion. Bret Hart, still in the sharpshooter, hadn't tapped out. He hadn't submitted. He'd been screwed, legitimately and publicly, by the company he'd devoted his entire adult life to. The confusion in Bret's eyes turned to realization, then to fury. Shawn Michaels quickly exited the ring and escaped backstage with DX as chaos erupted. Bret Hart spit in Vince's face while fans in Montreal rained garbage into the ring. In the backstage area immediately following the match, Bret would confront Vince McMahon face-to-face and, according to multiple witnesses, punch the boss square in the jaw, giving him a black eye that would be visible on television for weeks. Bret Hart left the WWF that night and didn't return for almost a decade. The next night on Raw, Vince McMahon sat down for an interview with Jim Ross. Sporting the black eye Bret had given him, Vince delivered his now infamous line, "Bret screwed Bret." The intention was to position himself as a sympathetic authority figure. Instead, Vince McMahon became the most hated man in professional wrestling. Fans didn't buy his justifications. They saw a backstabbing corporate villain who'd screwed over a beloved star, but instead of trying to win fans back, the WWF leaned into it. The Mr. McMahon character was born, an evil billionaire boss who'd do anything to maintain power and control. This character would become the perfect antagonist for Stone Cold Steve Austin's anti-authority rebellion, providing the final ingredient needed for the Attitude Era to reach its full potential. But while the main event scene of 1997 was dominated by Austin, Undertaker, and the Montreal Screwjob, the year was also filled with countless other moments and character transformations that helped shape the WWF's evolution toward the Attitude Era. Perhaps no transformation in 1997 was more important to the WWF's long-term success than the evolution of The Rock. The third-generation superstar had debuted in late 1996 as the ultimate babyface, but was actively rejected by the fans. The turning point came when Rocky embraced the hate and joined the Nation of Domination as a cocky, arrogant heel. As a member of the Nation, Rocky began finding his voice on the microphone and developed the catchphrases and electrifying presence that would eventually make him the most successful crossover star in wrestling history. By the end of 1997, Rocky had shortened his name to simply The Rock and became the leader of the Nation of Domination. But not all of 1997's memorable moments were positive. On October 5th, the day of the Bad Blood pay-per-view, Tragedy struck when Brian Pillman was found dead in his hotel room due to an undetected heart condition exacerbated by years of painkiller abuse. What made the situation even more uncomfortable was the way WWF handled it. The very next night on Raw, Vince McMahon conducted a live interview with Pillman's widow, less than 24 hours after her husband's death. The interview came across as exploitative and tasteless, and would be rejected by fans as well as critics. International controversy also plagued the WWF in 1997 when Vader was detained in Kuwait during a tour. The incident occurred after Vader got physical with a Kuwaiti television presenter during an interview when the interviewer asked if wrestling was fake. But the most significant announcement of the year came on December 15th during an episode of Raw, when Vince McMahon acknowledged that the WWF had been losing the Monday Night Wars and that drastic changes were necessary. He told audiences that the company was embarking on a new creative direction. He promised that the WWF would no longer insult the intelligence of its fans with cartoonish characters. The product would become edgier, more realistic, and reflective of the rebellious attitude that defined late 1990s pop culture. The Attitude Era was born, and pro wrestling would never be the same. And while 1997 lit the match, 1998 was the year WWE caught fire. A year that saw The Undertaker throw Mankind off the top of the cell, when Austin and Tyson brawled on live TV, when Kane set Taker on fire inside a casket, when the Austin-McMahon rivalry became the hottest story in pro wrestling, when DX invaded WCW, when The Rock became the most electrifying man in sports entertainment. And these are just some of the things that happened in the wild year of 1998. 1998 was the year WWF finally turned the tide in the Monday Night Wars and the Attitude Era became a mainstream phenomenon. But what exactly made this year so explosive? What were the matches, moments, and storylines that elevated the WWF to heights it had never reached before? Let's turn back the clock and revisit the wild year when pro wrestling took over the world. After spending the majority of 1997 chasing the WWF Championship and battling his way through the Hart Foundation, Austin entered 1998 with one clear mission: become WWF Champion and make Vince McMahon's life a living hell. The tension between Austin and McMahon had been simmering since late 1997, but this year it would explode into a full-blown war that would define both men's legacies. The Royal Rumble in January set the stage for this clash. Stone Cold entered the match at number 24, and despite having the target of the entire locker room on his back, the Texas Rattlesnake systematically eliminated every challenger thrown his way. Austin's victory guaranteed him a main event spot at WrestleMania, but it also confirmed Vince McMahon's worst fears. The beer-drinking, authority-defying rebel was one step away from becoming the face of his company. McMahon couldn't stomach the idea. Austin represented everything Vince despised. But the most memorable moment of the Royal Rumble fallout came the following night on Raw when the baddest man on the planet, Mike Tyson, made a special appearance. Tyson arrived on Raw to announce his involvement in WrestleMania as the special guest enforcer for the main event, but what happened next became one of the most iconic segments in Raw history. Stone Cold interrupted Tyson's announcement, marched down to the ring, and got directly in the face of the baddest man on the planet. Austin flipped Tyson off, trash-talked him without any fear, and sparked a brawl that had to be broken up by dozens of security guards. The segment was pure chaos, and it brought mainstream attention to the company. Vince McMahon was furious, not because the segment didn't work, but because Austin had once again proven he couldn't be controlled. McMahon wanted a corporate champion, but Austin was the exact opposite, and the boss made it his mission to ensure the Rattlesnake never wore the WWF Championship. But despite McMahon's best efforts to stack the deck against him, Stone Cold defeated Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 14 to capture his first WWF Championship. Mike Tyson, in a shocking double-cross, revealed himself to be aligned with Austin rather than DX and raised Stone Cold's hand as the new champion. The Austin era had begun, and WWF had a champion who felt genuinely unstoppable. The night after WrestleMania, Austin made it crystal clear he had no intention of being Vince's puppet. Stone Cold delivered a stunner to McMahon and announced that nobody would ever tell him how to act or who to be. But Vince McMahon wasn't going to give up that easily. If he couldn't control Austin, he'd destroy him. Throughout the spring and summer, McMahon handpicked a series of challengers designed to take the championship away from Stone Cold. But what the boss didn't count on was that Stone Cold Steve Austin thrived in chaos. The more McMahon tried to destroy him, the more popular Austin became. He'd drive a Zamboni to the arena, hold Vince at gunpoint, and even cause the boss to pee his pants. However, by the summer of 1998, Austin was set to face his biggest challenge in the form of two brothers whose personal war had engulfed the entire WWF. While Stone Cold was waging war against corporate authority, The Undertaker and Kane's supernatural saga was starting to pick up. The tension between the brothers had been simmering throughout the early months of the year, with Kane desperate to prove himself superior to The Undertaker, while the dead man remained reluctant to truly unleash his fury on his own flesh and blood. However, that all changed at the Royal Rumble when Kane interfered in The Undertaker's casket match against Shawn Michaels, costing his brother the WWF Championship. But Kane didn't just cost Undertaker the match. He locked the dead man inside the casket and set it ablaze in one of the most shocking moments in WWF history. Flames engulfed the casket as Paul Bearer cackled maniacally at ringside, and when the fire was finally extinguished, The Undertaker was nowhere to be found. For weeks, the WWF treated The Undertaker as if he'd been killed. But you can't kill what's already dead. Just days before WrestleMania, Taker made his return when lightning struck a casket on the stage. This version of Taker was different. Darker, more vengeful. The usually stoic dead man now had murder in his eyes. The stage was set for their inevitable confrontation at WrestleMania 14, where the two behemoths would finally settle their differences in front of over 19,000 fans. The match itself was less about technical wrestling and more about two unstoppable forces settling the score. The Undertaker dominated much of the encounter, but Kane's supernatural resilience kept bringing him back from the brink of defeat. In the end, The Undertaker hit Kane with 3 tombstone piledrivers to finally put his brother down for the 3 count. The victory should have ended their rivalry, but in the world of the WWF, the story never ends. Throughout the spring and summer, Kane and The Undertaker's paths continued to cross. Taker even defeated Kane in the first ever Inferno match, but their relationship took on a new dimension when Vince McMahon saw an opportunity. The boss saw 2 7-foot monsters who hated each other, and he realized he could weaponize that hatred against Stone Cold Steve Austin. McMahon began playing both brothers against each other while simultaneously pointing them toward the WWF champion. This created a volatile 3-way dynamic that would dominate the main event scene for months. At King of the Ring in June, the tension reached a breaking point when Austin was forced to defend his championship against Kane. The match was pure chaos, with both The Undertaker and McMahon getting involved at various points, and it ended with Kane capturing the WWF Championship for the first time in his career. But Kane's reign would last exactly one night. The very next night on Raw, Austin invoked his rematch clause and recaptured the championship. However, while the story of Kane, Taker, and Austin was dominating the main event scene, a bigger story was brewing elsewhere on the card, which would culminate with a deadly game tournament at Survivor Series. The upper mid-card scene in 1998 became a proving ground where future main eventers were being forged, and 3 men in particular would use it as their launching pad to superstardom. Mankind, aka Mick Foley, had spent years establishing himself as one of the WWF's most unpredictable performers. At the Royal Rumble, Foley entered the match 3 times, as Cactus Jack, Mankind, and Dude Love. But it was his transformation into Dude Love that would define the first half of his year. Vince McMahon, desperately searching for someone who could take the WWF Championship away from Stone Cold Steve Austin, saw an opportunity in Foley. The boss believed he could mold Mankind into a corporate puppet, someone who would follow orders and serve McMahon's interests rather than his own ego. At Unforgiven in April, Dude Love pushed Austin to his absolute limit as McMahon's hand-picked challenger, but Austin still managed to walk out with the title. In the second half of the year, as a reward for Foley's loyalty, Vince McMahon bestowed a brand new title upon Mankind, the Hardcore Championship. The belt was designed specifically for Foley's brand of extreme violence, and it gave the company a way to showcase the increasingly brutal matches that had become a staple of the Attitude Era. But more importantly, it kept Mankind in Vince's pocket. Foley played along, believing that his loyalty to McMahon would eventually be rewarded with a shot at the WWF Championship. But what he didn't realize was that Vince was playing multiple angles at once, and Mankind was just a pawn in a much larger game. The Rock's evolution in 1998 represents one of the most successful character transformations in wrestling history. The fans who had once rejected Rocky as a babyface now couldn't get enough of his arrogant, trash-talking heel persona. Throughout the spring and summer, The Rock's confidence grew exponentially. His promos became must-see TV as he developed the catchphrases and electrifying presence that would eventually make him a crossover superstar. By the summer, The Rock had kicked Farouk out of the Nation of Domination and taken over as the faction's leader. But The Rock's ambition extended far beyond the Nation. He wanted the WWF Championship, and he made that desire known loudly and repeatedly. The problem was that Vince McMahon didn't trust The Rock. Despite his growing popularity and undeniable charisma, The Rock had shown too much independence, too much ego, and too much willingness to put himself first rather than following corporate directions. Throughout the fall, McMahon actively worked against The Rock, trying to keep him out of championship contention. Meanwhile, Triple H was experiencing his own transformation in 1998. After Shawn Michaels retired following WrestleMania 14, Triple H took over as the leader of D-Generation X, rebuilding the faction with X-Pac, Road Dogg, and Billy Gunn. Triple H positioned himself as a main event player throughout the year, capturing the Intercontinental Championship and engaging in high-profile feuds with The Rock and Owen Hart. But more importantly, Triple H was learning how to be a top guy, developing the psychology and presence that would eventually make him one of the company's most dominant champions in years to come. All three men, Mankind, The Rock, and Triple H, eyed the Survivor Series Deadly Game tournament with championship aspirations, but only one could leave as WWF champion. Meanwhile, the Austin-Kane-Taker saga had taken a wild turn. Taker had turned heel and aligned with his brother in an attempt to dethrone the Texas Rattlesnake. At Breakdown, Taker and Kane pinned Austin at the same time, leading to the title being vacated. At Judgment Day in October, Kane and The Undertaker faced off for the vacant WWF Championship with Stone Cold as the special guest referee. McMahon had threatened to fire Austin if he didn't do his job properly, but the Rattlesnake had no intention of following Vince's orders. When the match reached its conclusion, Austin refused to count the pin for either brother, instead laying both men out with a steel chair and declaring himself the winner. McMahon had no choice but to follow through on his threat and fire Austin. The firing, of course, was temporary. Within weeks, Austin had been rehired by Shane McMahon as a way for Vince's son to stick it to his father. But by then, the damage had been done. The championship remained vacant, and the company desperately needed a solution to crown a new champion. Vince McMahon announced that at Survivor Series in November, a one-night tournament called the Deadly Game would determine the new WWF champion. 14 superstars would compete in a bracket-style tournament, with the finals taking place that same night. Kane and The Undertaker, having already proven they could beat Austin for the title, were both granted first-round byes. Mankind, still believing he was Vince's chosen champion, entered the tournament, and so did The Rock. However, the climax of the tournament led to one of the most shocking twists in wrestling history. In one of the most shocking betrayals of the year, Shane McMahon revealed himself to be aligned with his father all along, screwing Austin out of the tournament and sending Mankind to the finals. The Rock, meanwhile, navigated his side of the bracket by defeating Big Boss Man in the first round, Ken Shamrock in the quarterfinals, and The Undertaker in the semifinals. The finals pitted The Rock against Mankind in what appeared to be a straightforward match to crown a new champion. But Survivor Series 1998 had one more massive swerve in store. As the match reached its conclusion and Mankind appeared poised to capture his first WWF championship, The Rock turned on him and aligned with Vince McMahon. The Rock became WWF champion, but more importantly, he became the corporate champion, Vince McMahon's hand-picked golden boy who would carry the company forward as the face of corporate authority. The following weeks, The Rock explained that he didn't sell out. He bought in. He was proud to be the corporate champion, proud to align himself with the McMahon family, and completely unapologetic about betraying both the fans and Mankind to get to the top. The People's Champion had become the most hated man in the WWF, and the stage was set for his rivalry with Austin that would change the history of pro wrestling forever. But the explosion of the Attitude Era in 1998 wasn't just about the main event scene. D-Generation X, now led by Triple H, became the embodiment of everything the Attitude Era represented. The faction's most infamous moment came when DX loaded up a military jeep, drove to the arena where WCW Nitro was being held, and attempted to invade their competition. The tag team division started undergoing a renaissance, with teams like the New Age Outlaws, the Hardy Boys, and Edge and Christian beginning to establish themselves as future stars. Val Venis almost got his chopped off. Sable became a star. The Hardcore division, anchored by Mankind's new championship, provided a chaotic element, and by the time 1998 came to a close, the WWF had completely transformed itself. The company that had been on the verge of bankruptcy just 2 years earlier was now a mainstream phenomenon. Austin, The Rock, Kane, and The Undertaker had become household names, while the next generation of stars was already being groomed for greatness. All the pieces were in place for wrestling's greatest year. A year that saw The Rock cement his position on WWE's Mount Rushmore. A year when Triple H transformed from DX frat boy to the ruthless and calculating cerebral assassin. When The Undertaker went from an undead phenom to the motorcycle-riding American badass. When Kurt Angle had the most impressive rookie year in WWE history. When Shane McMahon risked it all for the love of the game. When Jeff Hardy jumped from insane heights to entertain the fans. When Mae Young got powerbombed off the stage. When divas like Lita, Chyna, and Trish Stratus started leaving their mark on WWE TV. When former WCW stars like Chris Jericho, Chris Benoit, and Eddie Guerrero became a key part of Monday nights. And this all makes up just some of the things that happened in the WWE in the year of 2000. From a business and creative standpoint, 2000 was the absolute peak for the wrestling juggernaut. But what exactly made this year so special? What were the memorable feuds, storylines, and characters that elevated WWE to heights it had never reached before? How does current WWE stack up to WWE in 2000? Let's turn back the clock and revisit the greatest year in WWE history. With Stone Cold Steve Austin sidelined due to neck surgery, WWE found itself in a precarious position heading into 2000. Austin had been the undisputed face of the company since 1997.
And that's the bottom line.
Driving force behind WWE's victory in the Monday Night War and their most reliable main event draw. When he was forced to take 9 months off for surgery after being written off television at Survivor Series 1999, many wondered if WWE could maintain their momentum without their biggest star. The answer came in the form of The Rock. Originally introduced as the third-generation wrestler, started as a rejected babyface before reinventing himself as the most electrifying man in sports entertainment in 1997. By 1998 and 1999, The Rock had established himself as one of WWE's top talents, but had always played second fiddle to Stone Cold's massive popularity. Austin's absence in 2000 finally gave The Rock the opportunity to step out of the Texas Rattlesnake's shadow and prove he could carry the company as its top babyface. The Rock's natural charisma,
What in the blue hell is wrong with you?
combined with his unparalleled mic skills
A punk-ass son of a bitch!
and electrifying catchphrases,
Finally, The Rock has come back!
made him the perfect successor to Austin's throne.
And that's the bottom line.
Where Austin was the beer-drinking, chaos-causing rebel, The Rock brought Hollywood star presence and unprecedented swagger to the main event scene. His ability to work both as a heel and face gave WWE creative flexibility that Austin's more rigid character couldn't provide. 2000 became The Rock's defining year. He won the Royal Rumble in January, main evented WrestleMania, and went on to headline an astounding 10 out of 12 pay-per-views that year, including 8 consecutive events from WrestleMania to No Mercy. Whether he was trading victories with Triple H, defending his title against the likes of Chris Benoit and Kurt Angle, or dealing with the chaos of multi-man main events, The Rock cemented his position as WWE's top star in 2000. More importantly, The Rock's mainstream appeal began to explode during this time, laying the groundwork for his eventual Hollywood career. He appeared on talk shows, became well-known in popular culture, and became a legit celebrity beyond wrestling. By the end of the year, The Rock had not only filled the void left by Austin's absence, but had established himself as a megastar in his own right. However, every great hero needs an equally compelling villain, and the year 2000 gave us the rise of wrestling's most cerebral assassin. Triple H's transformation in 2000 represents one of the most successful character evolutions in wrestling history. Gone was the Connecticut blue blood, and erased was the immature frat boy of D-Generation X. In their place stood The Game, a calculating, ruthless heel who would terrorize WWE for years to come. The catalyst for this transformation was the controversial storyline involving his marriage to Stephanie McMahon. In November 1999, during his feud versus Vince McMahon, Triple H revealed he had married an unconscious Stephanie in a Las Vegas drive-thru chapel. Triple H claimed that he wasn't just the best in the game, he was the game itself. This new cerebral assassin persona was perfect for the year 2000, and it saw Triple H defeat the Big Show to become WWE champion. His feuds with Mick Foley early in the year were career-defining for both men, particularly their Hell in a Cell match where Foley's career was on the line. What made Triple H's 2000 run so effective was his ability to adapt to different opponents while maintaining his core character. Whether he was defending the WWE Championship against the likes of The Rock and Chris Jericho, engaging in the complex love triangle with Kurt Angle and Stephanie, or serving as the final boss for Stone Cold's return storyline, Triple H served as the perfect villain for WWE's babyfaces. The formation of the McMahon-Helmsley faction gave him political power, and by December, Triple H had firmly established himself as WWE's premier heel. But WWE's dominance in 2000 wasn't just about elevating their homegrown talent. The year also saw the slow death of WCW, which led to multiple stars from the rival promotion jump ship to Vince McMahon's company. The arrival of the Radicals in January marked a seismic shift in WWE's roster depth. Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, Dean Malenko, and Perry Saturn had collectively asked for their WCW releases, frustrated by the company's refusal to push them. Chris Benoit made the most immediate impact, capturing the Intercontinental Championship and delivering consistently excellent matches that elevated the entire roster's in-ring quality. His technical style and intensity brought a legit feel to his matches, while his feuds with Chris Jericho showcased the kind of pure wrestling that had been missing during the Attitude Era. Eddie Guerrero's transformation was equally amazing. His Latino Heat character allowed him to display both his incredible wrestling ability and natural charisma, something WCW had never fully capitalized on. His romantic storylines with China added layers to his character, while his matches consistently stole the show. Chris Jericho, who had arrived in the WWE in 1999, truly found his footing in 2000. After struggling initially to connect with WWE audiences, Y2J's natural wit and arrogance began to shine through. His feuds with established stars like Triple H for the WWE Championship proved he belonged in the main event conversation, while his matches against the likes of Chris Benoit and Kurt Angle cemented him as one of the best in-ring performers of this time period. These former WCW stars brought credibility, work rate, and fresh matchups that revitalized Monday nights. Yet perhaps no single acquisition could match the meteoric rise of a certain Olympic gold medalist. Kurt Angle's ascension in the year 2000 remains one of the best rookie years in wrestling history. What made Angle special wasn't just his legit Olympic background, it was how perfectly he understood character work and adapted to the sports entertainment style of WWE. His portrayal of the arrogant, all-American hero who genuinely believed his own hype was perfect heel work. The character work was matched by incredible in-ring ability. Angle's amateur wrestling foundation gave him a unique style that combined technical precision with surprising power and agility for a man his size. His matches elevated every opponent, whether he was trading holds with the likes of Chris Benoit and Chris Jericho or brawling with powerhouses like The Undertaker and Triple H. The learning curve that typically takes wrestlers years to navigate was compressed into months for Angle. His championship victories throughout 2000 marked the greatest rookie year in WWE history. The European Championship, Intercontinental Championship, and King of the Ring tournament victory were merely stepping stones to his ultimate prize. When Angle defeated The Rock for the WWE Championship at No Mercy in October, it marked the completion of a journey from Olympic rookie to world champion in less than a year. But most impressively, Angle's personal storylines added depth to his character without overshadowing his athletic achievements. His alignment with Edge and Christian, the love triangle involving Triple H and Stephanie McMahon, showcased his acting ability without watering down his in-ring performance. By the end of 2000, Kurt Angle had established himself as a complete performer who belonged in the world title picture. Meanwhile, one of WWE's most established stars was undergoing his own dramatic transformation that would mark a new chapter of an already legendary career. The Undertaker's metamorphosis from supernatural deadman to motorcycle-riding American badass represented one of the boldest character reinventions in wrestling history. After nearly a decade of portraying the mystical phenom, Mark Calaway shed the gothic persona that had defined his career and became a beer-drinking, Harley-riding tough guy who fit perfectly with the Attitude Era's grittier aesthetic. The transformation debuted at Judgment Day during The Rock and Triple H's Iron Man match, when Undertaker roared into the arena on a motorcycle, and this complete personality overhaul connected with fans of the era who had grown up listening to nu metal and embracing rebel culture. This new Undertaker brought fresh energy to his feuds, whether battling Kurt Angle, participating in the chaotic Hell in a Cell match at Armageddon, or forming unlikely alliances with The Rock and Kane. While main event storylines like Taker's return and The Rock vs. Triple H captured headlines, the year 2000 also revolutionized wrestling at every other level of the card. The tag team division in 2000 reached heights that have arguably never been matched since. Edge and Christian, the Hardy Boys, and the Dudley Boys completely redefined what tag team wrestling could be. Their triangle ladder match at WrestleMania and the first ever TLC match at SummerSlam introduced fans to a level of risk-taking and innovative offense that had never been seen before on WWE TV. Hardy's Swanton Bomb off a 20-foot ladder and Edge spearing Jeff from the top of a ladder are moments that fans still cherish to this day. Each team brought distinct personalities. Edge and Christian's pretty boy looks and arrogant comedy, the Hardy Boys' death-defying aerial attacks, and the Dudley Boys' hardcore brawling style created magic that elevated tag team wrestling from bathroom breaks to must-see TV. The mid-card scene was equally stacked with compelling storylines and characters. The Intercontinental Championship changed hands regularly between names like Chris Jericho, Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, and Kurt Angle. The women's division, while still developing, had some memorable moments with names like Lita and Trish Stratus becoming more prominently featured. Even the hardcore division, with its infamous 38 title title changes throughout the year provided a sense of chaos and excitement that maximized the use of the roster. Every wrestler on the roster had a defined role and personality that contributed to the show's overall cohesiveness. This roster depth meant that every segment of every show served a purpose. There were rarely any throwaway matches or meaningless feuds. Everything connected to create a living, breathing wrestling universe where every character mattered and every storyline was interconnected. Nowhere was this more evident than in the main event scene, where WWE was at the peak of creative storytelling in the year 2000. The Triple H, Kurt Angle, and Stephanie McMahon love triangle stands as one of WWE's most entertaining storylines of all time. What began as Kurt's crush on Stephanie evolved into something more complex, with genuine ambiguity about whether Stephanie was reciprocating his feelings or simply using him for her own purposes. Triple H's paranoia and jealousy added layers of drama, while Kurt's naive charm added depth to this character. The McMahon family dynamics added another layer of complexity, with Vince, Shane, Linda, and Stephanie all playing different roles throughout the year. The Stone Cold parking lot mystery became one of WWE's most memorable whodunit storylines, though the payoff felt rather underwhelming. The initial revelation that Rikishi was responsible
I did it for The Rock
felt anticlimactic, but the subsequent twist that Triple H had orchestrated everything elevated the storyline. The first ever six-man Hell in a Cell at Armageddon perfectly encapsulated the year's main event chaos, with every major storyline culminating in one match. Austin seeking revenge, The Rock chasing the championship, Triple H proving his worth, The Undertaker asserting his dominance, Kurt Angle defending the title, and Rikishi paying for his actions, all in one match. Austin's return at Backlash, Triple H and Mick Foley's brutal battle, Taker's return as the American Badass, the iconic first ever TLC match, Shane McMahon falling off the stage, Triple H and Trish's backstage antics, and Mae Young being powerbombed off the stage were just some of the unhinged moments from WWE in 2000 that made this year so iconic. When the dust settled in December, WWE had achieved a perfect storm of creative excellence and mainstream popularity that has never been replicated. The year represented the Attitude Era at its most refined, combining the edginess that made it famous with storytelling sophistication and in-ring action that elevated it beyond mere shock value. Over 2 decades later, WWE still chases the magic of 2000. It remains the gold standard against which all other years are measured, because when it's all said and done, WWE in 2000 was at its peak. But after this wild run of the Attitude Era, the company would struggle for the next 4 years as top stars left and media criticism forced storylines to be less edgy. However, the company was slowly rebuilding with a new class of stars, and the payoff came in 2005 when we got the hottest year in WWE history. A year that saw Edge steal Matt Hardy's girlfriend, when Randy Orton set The Undertaker on fire, when JBL made Cena bleed buckets, when Vince tore both his quads, when Batista gave Triple H the thumbs down, when HBK made Hogan look like a fool in front of the world, when Ray and Eddie fought over the custody of Dominic, when ECW came back from the dead, when 2 new champions were crowned on the grandest stage of them all, and these are just some of the things that happened in the unforgettable year of 2005. From a creative standpoint, 2005 was the year WWE finally moved on from the Attitude Era and embraced ruthless aggression. The company had spent 3 years rebuilding after losing icons like The Rock and Austin. But rather than dwelling on the past, in 2005, WWE bet everything on creating new stars. The year had controversial storylines, personal angles, and 2 men in particular would rise to the top and change WWE for years to come. But what made 2005 so iconic? What were the feuds, the controversies, and the real-life drama that shaped WWE's future? Let's turn back the clock and revisit the hottest year in WWE history. Our story starts in January at the Royal Rumble. 30 men would compete to earn their ticket to the WrestleMania main event, and the stage was set for WWE's future. The final 2 competitors were Batista and John Cena, both men being groomed as the next big thing in WWE. The match was supposed to end with Batista eliminating Cena and earning his WrestleMania title shot. Instead, both men tumbled over the top rope and hit the floor simultaneously in one of the most infamous botches in WWE history. Referees panicked, producers scrambled, and then, in a moment that became legendary for its absurdity, Vince McMahon stormed to the ring to restart the match. As the boss slid under the ropes, he legitimately tore both of his quads. Unable to stand, McMahon was forced to sit in the ring barking orders while his legs dangled beneath him. The visual was unintentionally hilarious, but the show had to go on. Batista won the restarted match as planned. But the real drama came in the following weeks as Triple H tried desperately to manipulate his protege. Heading into 2005, Triple H's reign of terror had suffocated Raw for over 2 years. Despite delivering some memorable matches, the game's stranglehold on the World Heavyweight Championship had grown stale. Meanwhile, his Evolution stablemate Batista was showing signs of independence, and fans were ready to see the animal break free. The game attempted to convince Batista to challenge JBL for the WWE Championship on SmackDown instead, allowing Evolution to control both brands. The Puppet Master pulled every string he could, but on the February 21st episode of Raw, Batista finally snapped. He gave Triple H the thumbs down, powerbombed him through a table, and completed his babyface turn. The stage was set for WrestleMania 21, where after 2 years of dominance, Triple H's reign of terror came to an end at the hands of his protege. The animal was unleashed, and he had taken over as the king of the jungle. But while Batista's rebellion dominated Raw's main event scene, another Evolution member was stuck in a fight against the dead that had changed the landscape of WrestleMania forever. After being kicked out of Evolution, Randy Orton spent months floundering in the mid-card scene on Raw. But heading into WrestleMania 21, Orton needed to make a statement, and what better way to make a statement than by conquering the dead? The Legend Killer set his sights on the biggest legend of them all, The Undertaker and his undefeated WrestleMania streak. Before this, the streak hadn't always been marketed as the legendary spectacle it would later become. Before this, it was just a number. But heading into WrestleMania 21, WWE made the conscious decision to transform Undertaker's record into a Mania spectacle. Orton was the perfect opponent for this new direction. Young, cocky, and desperate to cement his legacy, the Legend Killer believed he could accomplish what no one else had. He mocked Taker's legacy, RKO'd his own girlfriend, attacked other WWE legends, and at WrestleMania 21 in Los Angeles, Taker and Orton collided in a match that would set the template for every other streak match that followed. For over 14 minutes, Orton threw everything he had at the dead man. But in the end, The Undertaker stood tall and kept his WrestleMania legacy intact. Most rivalries would have ended there, but Orton's obsession with destroying The Undertaker had only just begun. After a brief hiatus due to a shoulder injury, Orton returned to WWE and was drafted to SmackDown, putting him on the same brand as the Dead Man. What followed was a descent into madness that showcased just how unhinged the Legend Killer could become. Orton wasn't content with simply beating The Undertaker. He wanted to end him once and for all. The rivalry escalated with each passing week. Orton and his father attacked the Dead Man at every opportunity. They tricked him at SummerSlam. They mocked him with retirement fund DVDs. They presented him with a casket containing a mannequin. And at No Mercy in October, the Ortons defeated Undertaker in a handicap casket match, stuffing the Phenom inside and sealing him in. But that wasn't enough for Randy Orton. In one of the most shocking moments of the year, Orton drilled holes into the casket and then set it on fire with the Undertaker locked inside. For weeks, Orton reveled in his apparent victory, convinced he had finally ended the Undertaker's career. But the Dead Man doesn't die easily. Throughout the fall, supernatural occurrences began haunting Orton. The Undertaker returned from the grave, more powerful and vengeful than ever, tormenting Orton with mind games that drove the Legend Killer to the brink of a breakdown. The rivalry culminated at Armageddon inside Hell in a Cell, where The Undertaker finally put the feud to rest with a definitive victory. The story of Orton's overconfidence and the Dead Man's resilience was one of the hottest feuds of the year. But more importantly, it cemented The Undertaker's WrestleMania streak as one of the most important narratives in WWE history. But while Batista was conquering Raw and Orton was battling the Supernatural on SmackDown, another megastar was rising who would define WWE for the next decade. John Cena had spent the majority of 2004 climbing the ranks on SmackDown and connecting with younger audiences with his rapper gimmick in ways WWE hadn't seen in years. By early 2005, it was clear that Cena had outgrown the United States Championship. He was ready for the main event, and WWE was ready to give him the ball. At WrestleMania 21, Cena challenged JBL for the WWE Championship, and when the referee's hand hit the mat for the 3 count, a new era had officially begun. But Cena's coronation came with an unexpected problem. Just 6 weeks after winning the title, WWE made a shocking decision. On June 6th, John Cena was drafted from SmackDown to Raw, taking the WWE Championship with him. The move was designed to position Cena as the face of the company on WWE's flagship show. Instead, it exposed him to a much harsher spotlight. On Raw, Cena's character began to shift. The edgy rapper persona was softened into a more superhero-like babyface. He started wearing colorful shirts and promoting hustle, loyalty, and respect. Kids loved it, but the hardcore fans hated it. Throughout the summer and fall, Cena defended his title against Chris Jericho and Kurt Angle in excellent matches, but the crowd reactions kept growing hostile. By the time Unforgiven rolled around in September, Cena was being loudly booed despite being the champion babyface. The company had created a star, but they hadn't anticipated the backlash. But while Cena continued his ascent on Raw, his future biggest rival was stuck in a love triangle that would take personal feuds to a new level. Matt Hardy and Lita had been dating since 1999. By early 2005, Hardy was out with a knee injury and suggested that his girlfriend travel with their old friend Edge on the road to keep her company. Edge was married at the time and considered a trusted friend. Matt thought she'd be safe, but he was wrong. Edge and Lita began an affair behind Hardy's back. When Edge's wife discovered incriminating phone calls between the two, she informed Matt about the relationship. Heartbroken and furious, Hardy broke up with Lita and began dropping hints on his website about what had happened. The situation exploded into public view, and WWE's immediate response was to fire Matt Hardy. However, the decision backfired spectacularly. Fans rallied behind Hardy. They brought signs to WWE events, they chanted his name, and the heat was so intense that WWE had no choice but to bring Hardy back and turn the real-life drama into a storyline. On July 11th, Matt Hardy returned to Raw and attacked Edge backstage, screaming that he was going to make his life a living hell. The worked shoots blurred reality and fiction in uncomfortable ways as both men referenced the affair openly on television. Lita called Matt obsessive. Edge claimed the situation was ruining his life. Matt admitted he'd been shopping for wedding rings before everything fell apart. The feud culminated in a series of matches at SummerSlam, Unforgiven, and Raw, with Edge winning the majority of them. In the end, Hardy lost a loser leaves Raw ladder match and was sent to SmackDown. Edge and Lita remained together on Raw, and their real-life relationship gave rise to one of the most hated couples in WWE history. But if the Edge and Lita situation was personal, nothing could prepare fans for the soap opera that was about to unfold on SmackDown. Eddie Guerrero and Rey Mysterio were best friends. They'd won the WWE Tag Team Championships together earlier in the year. But Eddie, ever the master manipulator, had become consumed by jealousy. Rey kept beating him. Rey kept overshadowing him. And Eddie couldn't accept being second best. The breaking point came when Eddie brutally assaulted Rey and ripped his mask off on live television. What followed was a character transformation that showcased Eddie's incredible range as a performer. The Latino Heat became unhinged, desperate, and willing to do anything to destroy his former friend. At Judgment Day, Eddie beat up Rey with a steel chair. But that wasn't enough for Eddie. Eddie had a secret, one he'd been holding over Rey's head for weeks. Eddie finally revealed the truth that Rey Mysterio wasn't Dominic's biological father. Eddie claimed that years ago, when Rey couldn't have children, Eddie had given his son to the Mysterio family. Now, he wanted Dominic back. Custody papers were presented, social workers got involved, and at SummerSlam, the two competed in a ladder match where the winner would gain legal custody of the child. For 15 minutes, Eddie and Rey delivered another excellent performance while a terrified Dominic watched from ringside. Vicky Guerrero, Eddie's real-life wife, ultimately betrayed her husband by pushing over the ladder, allowing Rey to grab the custody papers and keep his son. While the storyline was ridiculous on paper, but Eddie and Rey's performances were so committed, so emotionally raw, that fans couldn't look away. It remains one of the most talked about angles in WWE history. But while some storylines in 2005 pushed the boundaries of personal vendetta, others were based on pure wrestling excellence. For years, people had called Shawn Michaels the greatest wrestler in WWE history, and Kurt Angle was determined to prove that statement was a lie. Over the following weeks, Angle embarked on a mission to recreate and surpass all of Michaels' greatest moments. He made fun of HBK's iconic ladder match win. He brought back Marty Jannetty to mock the Rockers. He even dressed up as Michaels himself, complete with chaps, sensational sherry, and a hilarious rendition of HBK's theme song. But when all the games were over, at WrestleMania 21, the two finally collided in what many consider the greatest match in WrestleMania history. For 27 minutes, Angle and Michaels delivered a 5-star classic that justified every ounce of hype. Angle won with the ankle lock, but both men proved they belonged in the conversation as all-time greats. But following his loss to Angle, Shawn Michaels found himself in another dream match scenario, this one decades in the making. Hulk Hogan, the immortal icon of the 1980s, had returned to WWE for a brief run. The company wasted no time booking Hogan and Michaels in a tag team match, which naturally led to the two agreeing to face each other one-on-one. Behind the scenes, however, tensions were brewing. The plan had been for Michaels and Hogan to wrestle a series of matches, with each man getting a victory. But Hogan, never one to willingly lose his spot, politicked his way into only agreeing to a single match at SummerSlam. And of course, the Hulkster would be going over. Shawn Michaels was furious. He'd spent years working his way back to the top of the WWE. But now Hogan, who hadn't been a full-time performer in years, was refusing to put him over. So Michaels decided to make a statement in the most Shawn Michaels way possible. At SummerSlam on August 21st, HBK delivered one of the most ridiculous performances in wrestling history, which was a masterclass in pettiness. For 20 minutes, Michaels turned the match into a comedy routine by overselling every single move Hogan threw at him. A simple shove sent Michaels spinning through the air. A boot to the face caused him to flip completely over. The Toronto crowd ate it up, laughing and cheering as Michaels made a mockery of Hogan's offense. Hogan got the pinfall victory as agreed, but everyone watching knew the truth. Shawn Michaels had won the war. The match became an instant classic for all the wrong reasons, and Hogan never worked with Michaels again. But apart from these memorable matches and rivalries, 2005 also had other historic moments that defined the year. On June 12th, WWE presented ECW One Night Stand, a pay-per-view dedicated to the extreme wrestling promotion that had closed its doors 4 years earlier. The Hammerstein Ballroom in New York City became a time machine as legends like Sabu, Sandman, and Tommy Dreamer returned to recapture the magic. The show was so successful that it planted the seeds for ECW's eventual revival as a WWE brand. But just as the year seemed to be reaching its peak, tragedy struck. On November 13th, Eddie Guerrero was found unresponsive in his Minneapolis hotel room. The 38-year-old had suffered a massive heart attack brought on by years of substance abuse that had taken its toll on his body. His nephew Chavo discovered him, but it was too late. One of the most beloved performers in wrestling history was gone. The wrestling world mourned. Tribute shows replaced Raw and SmackDown. Wrestlers broke down in tears on live television. Eddie's death cast a shadow over the final months of 2005, reminding everyone that behind the larger-than-life characters, real human lives hung in the balance. By the time 2005 ended, WWE had accomplished what many thought impossible. They'd created 2 legit main event stars in Batista and John Cena. They'd elevated the Undertaker streak into a WrestleMania tradition. They'd pushed the boundaries of reality with controversial storylines. And they'd delivered some of the greatest matches in company history. The pieces were in place for WWE's next chapter, but the memories of 2005, both triumphant and tragic, would echo through the company for years to come. It truly was one of the hottest years in WWE history. But after the brilliance of 2005, the wrestling world would soon face its darkest day. WWE in 2007 was off to a hot start. You had John Cena versus Shawn Michaels, Batista versus The Undertaker, and WrestleMania broke pay-per-view records with Trump shaving Vince bald. It seemed like the company had finally found its footing in the post-Attitude Era landscape. But then, everything went downhill. What followed was an unprecedented cascade of real-world tragedies, career-ending scandals, devastating injuries, intense media scrutiny, exploding limousines, and government investigations that all culminated in the darkest period WWE had ever experienced. While the product on television still remained decent with stars like Cena, Batista, Edge, and Randy Orton leading the charge, behind the scenes, WWE was fighting for its very survival as controversies mounted week after week. So what exactly made 2007 the darkest year in WWE history? What were the tragedies, scandals, and disasters that almost caused the wrestling industry to crumble completely? And how did a company that started the year with such promise find itself desperately trying to rebuild its reputation from the ground up? Let's find out. Let's start by talking about the darkest tragedy in WWE history that changed everything. The weekend of June 24, 2007 began like any other pay-per-view weekend for WWE. WWE Vengeance was set to take place in Houston, and one of the most anticipated matches on the card was Chris Benoit defending his ECW championship against the up-and-coming CM Punk. But when showtime arrived, Benoit was nowhere to be found. Initially, WWE officials were told that Benoit couldn't make it due to a family emergency involving carbon monoxide poisoning at his home. While the news was concerning, these things happened occasionally in wrestling, and the show had to go on. Johnny Nitro was quickly substituted into the match, defeating CM Punk to become the new ECW champion. Throughout the night, fans and fellow wrestlers kept wondering where their beloved technical wrestler had gone. But behind the scenes, a much darker reality was unfolding. WWE officials couldn't reach Benoit by phone, and as hours passed without contact, panic began to set in. The company was already dealing with the fallout from Vince McMahon's exploding limousine segment, which was supposed to culminate in a special 3-hour tribute episode of Raw the following night. Instead, the planned McMahon Memorial Show was quickly scrapped when news broke that would change everything. On Monday afternoon, just hours before Raw was set to air, police discovered the bodies of Chris Benoit, his wife Nancy, and their 7-year-old son Daniel at their home in Fayetteville, Georgia. Initial reports suggested a possible family tragedy, perhaps the carbon monoxide poisoning that had been mentioned earlier. In a state of shock and confusion, WWE made the decision to transform their planned McMahon tribute into a Chris Benoit memorial show. For 3 hours, WWE superstars sat with tears in their eyes, sharing memories of Benoit and showcasing his greatest matches. They showed his Royal Rumble victory, his WrestleMania triumph, and countless technical masterpieces that had made him one of the most respected wrestlers in the world. Edge broke down on camera. William Regal spoke about Benoit's dedication to the craft. It was a touching tribute to a man they all believed had died tragically alongside his family. But as the show progressed, more details began emerging from the police investigation. This wasn't a family tragedy or an accident, it was something darker. Chris Benoit had killed his wife Nancy, his son Daniel, and then taken his own life. The revelation hit WWE like a nuclear bomb. Vince McMahon, who had been dealing with his fictional death storyline, now faced a very real crisis that threatened to destroy his company's reputation forever. The next night on ECW, a visibly shaken McMahon appeared on television to address what had become apparent. With one of the angriest expressions ever seen on his face, he promised that Chris Benoit's name would never be mentioned on WWE programming again, but the damage was already done. The wrestling world had just broadcast a 3-hour tribute to a man who had committed one of the most heinous crimes imaginable, and mainstream media was about to pounce on the industry like never before. Within hours of the Benoit tragedy being revealed, every major news outlet in America descended upon pro wrestling like vultures. CNN, Fox News, ESPN, and countless other networks launched into wrestling with a vengeance. The narrative painted WWE and pro wrestling as a cesspool of steroid abuse and violence. When wrestlers like Kevin Nash appeared on Fox News to provide context and defend their industry, they were met with hostile interrogation rather than genuine discussion. The media's approach was ruthless and often dishonest. Anchors who had never watched a wrestling match in their lives suddenly became experts on the industry and painted every wrestler as a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. What made the media assault particularly devastating was its timing. Wrestling had already been dealing with public perception problems since the end of the Attitude Era, and this gave critics the ammunition they needed to paint the entire industry as irredeemably corrupt. But the media firestorm was just the beginning of WWE's problems, because as reporters dug deeper into the wrestling world, they uncovered a scandal that would forever change how WWE superstars looked and performed. As if the media scrutiny following the Benoit tragedy wasn't devastating enough, WWE was about to face an even more immediate crisis that would gut their roster and expose the widespread use of performance-enhancing drugs throughout the industry. The investigation had actually begun months earlier, in February 2007, when Sports Illustrated started looking into a potential steroid distribution network operating out of Florida. What started as a routine investigation quickly expanded into something much larger when major wrestling names began appearing in the records. Kurt Angle was the first major star implicated, though he denied any wrongdoing. But Angle was just the tip of the iceberg. On March 19, 2007, Sports Illustrated dropped a bombshell article revealing that multiple wrestlers had received prescriptions from Dr. David Wilbert in Arizona between November 2004 and April 2005. The initial list included names like Eddie Guerrero, Rey Mysterio, Randy Orton, Edge, and Gregory Helms. Edge's response was particularly damaging to WWE's credibility. Rather than denying the allegations, he admitted to using steroids after his neck injury, explaining that they were prescribed to help the bones grow back around the screws and plates in his neck. The situation exploded on August 30, 2007, when the New York Daily News published a comprehensive list of wrestlers who had received steroids and other drugs from internet doctors. 12 current WWE wrestlers were named, and the fallout was catastrophic. Chavo Guerrero, Shane Helms, Randy Orton, John Morrison, Mr. Kennedy, Funaki, Charlie Haas, Umaga, William Regal, Edge, and several others were suspended for violating WWE's wellness policy. The timing couldn't have been worse. WWE was already dealing with the Benoit aftermath and intense media scrutiny. Now they were losing another dozen wrestlers to suspensions. Storylines had to be rewritten overnight. Umaga lost the Intercontinental Championship to Jeff Hardy, John Morrison was stripped of the ECW title and lost it to CM Punk, and countless other angles were abruptly terminated. But perhaps most heartbreaking was Mr. Kennedy's fall from grace. Kennedy had been positioned as WWE's next big star, chosen to be revealed as Vince McMahon's illegitimate son in what was supposed to be a career-defining storyline. Instead, his suspension ended his push, and the angle was quickly rewritten with Hornswoggle taking his place. The scandal didn't stop there. Congress got involved and demanded records from WWE dating back to 1998. TNA was also asked to provide information, making this an industry-wide crisis. But even as WWE reeled from suspensions and media scrutiny, their problems were about to get worse. As if the Benoit tragedy and steroids scandal weren't devastating enough for WWE's roster, 2007 also became a year where it seemed like every major star was cursed to suffer career-threatening injuries at the worst possible moments. The injury plague began early in the year when Triple H suffered a devastating quad tear that would sideline him for 7 months. The timing was horrible since Triple H was being planned for a high-profile WrestleMania rematch with John Cena, forcing WWE to completely rewrite their biggest show of the year at the last minute. Shawn Michaels stepped into Triple H's spot, creating one of the best matches in WrestleMania history with Cena, but losing HBK's original opponent meant further reshuffling of an already complicated card. The domino effect of a single injury was already causing problems, but this was just the beginning of WWE's medical nightmare. The Undertaker, who had been having a career renaissance with his world title run and matches against Batista, went down with a torn bicep that forced him out of action for months. Edge, fresh off winning the World Heavyweight Championship and positioned as SmackDown's top heel, suffered a pectoral injury that forced him to vacate the title he had just won. Bobby Lashley, who had been built as ECW's franchise player, also suffered injuries that disrupted his momentum. But perhaps the most devastating blow came when John Cena, WWE's undisputed top star and face of the company, tore his pectoral muscle in October. The injury bug was so severe that by the summer of 2007, WWE's main event scene had been reduced to Batista, Rey Mysterio, Randy Orton, and King Booker. When you combine the injuries with the suspensions, WWE was left with a roster so thin that they were forced to put the World Heavyweight Championship on the Great Khali, not because he was the best choice, but because he was one of the only credible heels left standing. But WWE's crisis went beyond just immediate injuries and suspensions. These mounting disasters forced the company to make changes that would reshape the wrestling industry forever. The mounting crises of 2007 forced WWE into a desperate period that would fundamentally alter the direction of pro wrestling forever. What emerged was a complete philosophical shift that transformed WWE from the edgy, controversial shows that had defined the Attitude Era into something entirely different. The most immediate change came in response to the Benoit tragedy and the growing understanding of CTE in the company. Unprotected chair shots to the head, which had been a staple of hardcore wrestling for decades, were immediately banned following the discovery that Benoit's brain showed damage equivalent to an 87-year-old Alzheimer's patient. The company also implemented stricter concussion protocols and enhanced their wellness policy, which had originally been created after Eddie Guerrero's death. More frequent testing, stricter penalties, and increased medical oversight became the new standard as WWE tried to prove to critics that they were serious about performer safety. But the most visible change was WWE's gradual shift toward family-friendly programming. This wasn't entirely due to the 2007 controversies. There were financial incentives to pursuing a PG rating that would attract more mainstream advertisers and sponsors. However, the events of 2007 accelerated this transition dramatically. Network executives and advertisers who might have overlooked wrestling's edgier content were now actively distancing themselves from anything associated with WWE's violence and controversy. The move toward PG programming was evident in small changes at first. Hornswoggle began appearing in more child-friendly segments, blood was gradually reduced, and storylines became less focused on adult themes. The gritty look of Raw was abandoned, hardcore matches became increasingly rare, and the overall tone shifted from rebellious entertainment to something parents could watch with their children. WWE's decision to go HD in 2008 provided the perfect cover for this transition, but industry insiders knew the real motivation. The company needed to rebuild its reputation from the ground up, and that meant abandoning everything that had made wrestling controversial in the first place. Kelly couldn't do her provocative, extreme expose segments anymore. Storylines became less personal, and the general atmosphere had to become more sanitized. WWE was moving away from the crash TV mentality that had defined their success in the late 1990s toward something that could survive mainstream scrutiny. This shift toward PG programming would define WWE's content for over a decade, fundamentally changing how storylines were written, how characters were developed, and what kinds of matches could be presented. However, even as WWE was implementing these changes to salvage their reputation, 2007 still had more tragedy in store. What had already been the darkest period in WWE history became even more devastating as a cascade of wrestler deaths created an atmosphere of genuine fear. The year saw the deaths of Bam Bam Bigelow and Mike Awesome within a month of each other in early 2007. Bigelow was just 45 years old when he died from a drug overdose, while Awesome was only 42. In March, Bad News Brown and Ernie Ladd died within the same week, creating an eerie pattern that had wrestlers genuinely worried about who might be next. June brought the death of Sherry Martel from a drug overdose. The media used each death as evidence of wrestling's toxic culture, creating a narrative that painted the entire industry as a death trap. August brought yet another tragedy when Bryan Adams, known to fans as Crush, died at age 43 from mixing prescribed medications. Beyond the deaths, WWE was dealing with a host of other problems that would have been major crises in any normal year, but seemed almost minor compared to everything else happening. ECW was on life support after Vince McMahon's comedy championship reign killed whatever credibility the brand had left. The cruiserweight division became such a joke that WWE actually put the title on Hornswoggle. Creative teams were constantly rewriting shows due to suspensions, injuries, and other real-world crises interrupting their storylines. The threat of federal intervention loomed over every decision, making company executives paranoid about every aspect of their operation. Looking back at 2007, it's remarkable that WWE survived at all. Any one of these crises could have ended a smaller company. The combination of all of them should have been fatal. Yet, Vince McMahon and the WWE managed to survive the darkest year in history. And not only did they survive, the following year, WWE gave us one of its most entertaining years ever. When Jeff Hardy finally captured his childhood dream. When John Cena defied medical science and made his epic Royal Rumble return. When The Undertaker chokeslammed Edge to hell. When Randy Orton started kicking people in the head. When Chris Jericho put on a suit and transformed into the best villain WWE had seen in years. When Ric Flair said goodbye. When CM Punk won Money in the Bank. When the two biggest stars of the Ruthless Aggression era collided in a dream match. And these are just some of the things that happened in the wild year of 2008. When most people think of the greatest years in WWE history, they think of the late 90s or the early 2000s, but WWE in 2008 delivered unforgettable rivalries, shocking returns, and career-defining moments for multiple superstars. New champions were crowned, legends retired, and some of wrestling's greatest feuds unfolded on screens every week. So what made WWE in 2008 so special, yet so underrated? What were the matches, the moments, and the storylines that shaped WWE's future? Let's rewind the clock and relive one of the spiciest years in WWE history. Our story begins at the Royal Rumble. The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels, the final two from the previous year's Rumble, kick off the road to WrestleMania as the first two entrants this year. What follows is a blend of returns, nostalgic moments, and amazing performances from guys like CM Punk, Triple H, and Taker. However, the real show stealer of the night comes at number 30. In October 2007, John Cena suffered a torn pectoral muscle during a match on Raw. The injury was devastating, and initial estimates put his recovery time at 7 months minimum, potentially keeping him out of action until after WrestleMania. But 2008 Cena wasn't a normal human being. This was Super Cena. While most athletes would use an injury like this as an excuse to rest and recover slowly, Cena approached his rehabilitation like a Terminator. Cena was determined to return to the ring as quickly as humanly possible. And when Cena's music hit at number 30, MSG erupted. John Cena stepped through the curtain with a sly smirk on his face. The final moments came down to Cena and the game. For nearly 5 minutes, the two went back and forth before Cena eliminated Triple H and won the Royal Rumble. In another shocking development, Cena would announce that he wasn't going to wait till Mania and instead challenged Orton for the WWE title at No Way Out. Orton would intentionally get himself disqualified and retain the title, leading to a triple threat at Mania between Orton, Cena, and Triple H, where the Viper managed to once again walk out with the gold. But while Orton was dominating Raw, a dark and personal story was brewing on SmackDown. In the summer of 2007, Edge cashed in his Money in the Bank on a weakened Undertaker and became the World Heavyweight Champion. After the Dead Man made his return, the Rated R superstar spent months dodging Taker's wrath. But the Phenom earned his shot by winning the SmackDown Elimination Chamber and punching his ticket to WrestleMania. At WrestleMania 24, The Undertaker defeated Edge to capture the World Heavyweight Championship and extend his undefeated streak to 16 wins. But this wasn't the end of their story. It was only the beginning. Edge had an advantage that most challengers didn't possess. His storyline girlfriend Vickie Guerrero served as SmackDown's general manager, and she was willing to abuse her power in every conceivable way to help her man succeed. In an act of blatant corruption, Vickie banned Taker's Hell's Gate, calling it too dangerous and stripping The Undertaker of the World Heavyweight Championship. At Judgment Day, The Undertaker and Edge battled once more for the vacant championship. Undertaker won the match by countout, but Vickie quickly reminded everyone that titles cannot change hands on a countout. The gold remained vacant, The Undertaker remained frustrated, and Edge continued to smile, knowing the game was rigged in his favor. That brought us to One Night Stand, where WWE decided to settle things once and for all. The match would be a TLC bout, Edge's specialty, a match type synonymous with his name from his legendary encounters with the Hardy Boys and Dudley Boys. For The Undertaker, it was uncharted territory. The dead man had competed in Hell in a Cell matches, casket matches, buried alive matches, but never in a TLC match. However, that wasn't the big story here. There was one more stipulation that made the stakes impossibly high. If The Undertaker lost, he would be forced to leave WWE. Edge brought his entire faction to ringside. Every time The Undertaker climbed toward the championship, La Familia dragged him back down. The numbers were too much. Towards the end, Undertaker ascended the ladder, fingertips inches from the gold. Edge, barely conscious, mustered one final burst of energy and shoved the ladder. The Undertaker tumbled backward, falling through 4 tables stacked at ringside in the most terrifying bump of his legendary career. Edge climbed the ladder and retrieved the championship. The Undertaker's career in WWE was over. Edge celebrated with his championship and his allies. Vickie Guerrero gloated from her position of power. And for the first time in years, SmackDown would have to move forward without the Phenom. Of course, this being professional wrestling, The Undertaker's banishment wouldn't last forever. 2 months later, after Edge was caught cheating on Vickie with their wedding planner, she would bring The Undertaker back for a Hell in a Cell match at SummerSlam. The dead man destroyed Edge at SummerSlam and chokeslammed him to hell in one of the most satisfying revenge moments in WWE history. The Edge and Taker feud carried SmackDown for months, and during that magical summer of 2008, they gave us some of the best segments and matches in WWE history. But while Edge and Taker dominated the first half of the year, a certain charismatic enigma's pursuit of the WWE Championship would define the second half. For years, Jeff Hardy had been dancing on the edge of greatness. He'd won tag team gold with his brother Matt, he'd captured the Intercontinental Championship multiple times, he'd stolen shows with death-defying stunts that left fans speechless. But the one prize that had always eluded him was the WWE Championship. In 2008, that would finally change, though the road to glory would be paved with setbacks, near misses, and heartbreak. The year started promisingly when Hardy challenged Randy Orton for the WWE Championship at the Royal Rumble. For a brief second, it looked like Hardy might capture his first world title, but then Orton reversed the twist of fate into an RKO, and the dream died. However, after being drafted to SmackDown in June, Hardy found himself thrust into the main event scene on the blue brand. He competed in the championship scramble match at Unforgiven, coming within seconds of winning the gold before time expired. Then, at No Mercy, he challenged Triple H one-on-one, landing a swanton bomb that should have sealed the victory, only for the game to roll him up for a quick pinfall. The frustration was mounting. Every time Hardy reached for the brass ring, it slipped through his fingers. At Survivor Series, Hardy was scheduled to challenge for the WWE Championship, but he was found unconscious in his hotel and written out of the match. Edge replaced him and captured the title. It seemed like yet another setback, another cruel twist of fate preventing Hardy from achieving his dream. But fans didn't give up on him. They kept chanting his name. They kept pushing him towards his dream. And it all led to December 14th, 2008, Armageddon. This was Jeff's last chance. In the closing moments, Triple H hit a pedigree on Edge. But before he could capitalize, Jeff delivered a swanton bomb onto Edge. Triple H rolled out of the ring. Hardy covered Edge, and 3 seconds later, the arena exploded. After years of coming up short, after months of near misses, Jeff Hardy was the WWE Champion. The image of Jeff standing atop the Armageddon set, championship held high, got etched in wrestling history. The underdog, The risk taker, the daredevil who'd put his body on the line for over a decade, had finally reached the mountaintop. But while Jeff was climbing his way to the top on SmackDown, Raw was about to see the biggest dream match of the Ruthless Aggression era. Ever since they both debuted in 2002, people had wondered when John Cena and Batista would finally clash. Both men had followed similar paths, but they'd been kept apart till now. Cena was on Raw, while Batista was on SmackDown. But that changed in 2008, when the Animal got drafted to Raw. On the July 21st episode of Raw, Batista was facing CM Punk for the World Heavyweight Championship when chaos erupted. JBL ran into the ring, trying to escape a vengeful John Cena. When Cena swung at JBL, he ducked, and Batista caught the punch instead. The tension was palpable. WWE seized the opportunity and announced that Cena and Batista would face each other at SummerSlam. It was billed as 6 years in the making, the first ever singles match between two of WWE's biggest stars. These were the two men who had carried WWE through the mid-2000s. These were the faces of the Ruthless Aggression era. And finally, they were going to settle who was truly the better man. At SummerSlam on August 17th in Indianapolis, the two delivered a physical war. Cena hit the AA, Batista hit the Batista bomb. Both men refused to stay down. Batista caught a high-flying Cena in midair and hit a modified Batista bomb, but Cena kicked out once again. Finally, Batista went into overdrive, hoisting Cena up for another devastating powerbomb, and this time got the 3 count. The Animal had proven himself 3 seconds better than John Cena on this historic night. But there was a price to pay for this blockbuster encounter. During the match, Cena suffered a legit neck injury that would sideline him for 3 months. But while Cena and Batista were settling their score, another rivalry was reaching its peak, one that would be remembered as the greatest feud WWE had produced in years. Chris Jericho versus Shawn Michaels, hero versus idol, truth versus perception. And by the summer of 2008, it had transformed into something far darker and more personal than anyone could have anticipated. The seeds were planted months earlier when Jericho served as special guest referee for the Batista versus Shawn Michaels match at Backlash. In that contest, Michaels faked a knee injury to gain an advantage, ultimately hitting Sweet Chin Music on Batista to steal the victory. Jericho was disgusted. This was his hero, the man he'd idolized his entire career, resorting to lies and manipulation. The fans still cheered for Michaels anyway, which only infuriated Jericho more. On an episode of Raw, Jericho invited Michaels onto his talk show segment, The Highlight Reel, only to grab Michaels and drive his head face first into the Geritron 5000. He traded in his leather jacket and jeans for tailored suits. He spoke with precision and confidence. He became a villain who believed he was the hero of his own story. At the Great American Bash in July, the two met in what became one of the bloodiest matches of the year. Jericho systematically targeted Michaels' injured eye, beating him so severely that the match had to be stopped by referee decision. Michaels disappeared from television for a month. Then, at SummerSlam, he returned with his wife Rebecca to announce his retirement. The eye injury was too severe, he explained. His career was over. But Jericho interrupted the emotional moment, demanding that Michaels admit it was all Jericho's doing. Words were exchanged, tempers flared, and when Jericho swung at Michaels, HBK ducked, and Rebecca took the punch. Jericho had crossed a line that shouldn't be crossed. Michaels' retirement was forgotten. He was coming back for revenge. At Unforgiven, they met in an unsanctioned match. For 25 minutes, they destroyed each other in what became one of the most violent encounters of the modern era. Michaels battered Jericho so badly that referees were forced to stop the match. The Heartbreak Kid had his revenge. But Jericho's night wasn't over. Later that evening, after CM Punk was attacked and unable to compete in the World Heavyweight Championship Scramble match, Jericho took his place, and despite being beaten within an inch of his life earlier, he won the championship. In a single night, Chris Jericho had gone from the lowest point of his career to the highest. The feud culminated at No Mercy in October with a ladder match for the World Heavyweight Championship. Jericho retrieved the championship, proving once and for all what he'd been saying all along. He wasn't Shawn Michaels. He was better. The Wrestling Observer would later name their ladder match as Match of the Year. Jericho won Wrestler of the Year, and the feud itself was recognized as Feud of the Year. Both Michaels and Jericho have since called it some of the best work of their careers. But while these major storylines dominated the headlines, 2008 was also defined by several other memorable moments that shaped WWE's landscape. Like CM Punk winning the Money in the Bank briefcase and cashing in on Edge to become World Heavyweight Champion, only for Randy Orton to punt him in the head and make him vacate the title. The year also saw the emotional WrestleMania match between HBK and Ric Flair when Shawn Michaels kicked the Nature Boy into retirement. Santino was comedic gold, William Regal won King of the Ring, and Big Show got punched by Floyd Mayweather. When the calendar flipped to 2009, WWE had fundamentally changed. The transition to the PG era was complete. But 2008 proved that WWE could still tell compelling stories, create new stars, and deliver unforgettable moments even with the PG-era restrictions. From John Cena defying medical science to The Undertaker versus Edge, to Jeff Hardy finally capturing his childhood dream, to Chris Jericho versus Shawn Michaels, 2008 was a year that was emotional as well as unpredictable. Looking back now, it stands as one of the most underrated years in WWE history, a transitional period that successfully bridged the gap between the ruthless aggression and the PG era, building wrestling's future while honoring its past. The company would continue to ride the momentum the following year and gave us some of the best matches and stories despite the PG restrictions. When Randy Orton became a menace to society, when The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels gave us the greatest match in WrestleMania history, when Big Show chokeslammed John Cena to the Shadow Realm, when Jeff Hardy's sudden exit broke everybody's heart, when Chris Jericho unmasked Rey Mysterio, when CM Punk became the most hated man on SmackDown. And these are just some of the things that happened during the crazy year of 2009. Most wrestling fans hate this year because they remember 2009 as the year WWE fully transitioned into the PG era. However, despite the PG restrictions, 2009 was filled with personal rivalries, shocking title changes, and career-defining performances that fans still rewatch to this day. So what made 2009 so special yet so underrated? What were the matches, feuds, and moments that defined WWE's dive in the PG era? Let's rewind the clock and relive the chaos of WWE in 2009. By the end of 2008, Randy Orton was already an established main event star. He'd won world championships, feuded with legends like The Undertaker, and the Legend Killer was one of the top stars in the company. However, in 2009, Randy Orton went full-on psycho mode and terrorized the entire wrestling world. His first target was none other than Vince McMahon. After a heated standoff, the Viper straight up kicked the chairman in the skull and established himself as the company's top heel. Randy then went on to win the 2009 Royal Rumble, punching his ticket to the main event of WrestleMania. But Orton wasn't done with the McMahon family. When Vince's daughter Stephanie brought back her brother Shane to deal with Orton, Randy ended up punting him in the skull too. But he didn't stop there either. He even RKO'd Stephanie and stood tall over her with a cold, emotionless stare. This wasn't just business anymore. This was personal. And there was one man who couldn't let it slide: Triple H. Triple H and Stephanie were married in real life. Heading into WrestleMania, the game wasn't just defending his championship. He was defending his family. Triple H invaded Orton's home and attacked him ruthlessly. But the Viper got his revenge days later when he handcuffed Triple H and kissed Stephanie right in front of him. The feud built to a boiling point heading into WrestleMania 25. Triple H promised he would end Randy once and for all on the grandest stage of them all, while Orton wanted revenge for Triple H kicking him out of Evolution 5 years ago. After almost 25 minutes of back-and-forth action, Triple H beat Orton and retained the WWE Championship. Orton's era of terror was over, or so everyone thought. But while Randy was making the McMahon's life a living hell on Raw, another iconic rivalry was gearing up for its final chapter. John Cena had entered 2009 as the World Heavyweight Champion after returning from injury and dethroning Chris Jericho. However, if Edge is on the same roster as Cena, you know Cena's life won't be peaceful. But here's the thing. In early 2009, Edge and Cena weren't even on the same roster. But the Rated R superstar still managed to finesse the system one more time. At No Way Out, Edge lost the WWE Championship inside the Elimination Chamber after being quickly eliminated by Jeff Hardy. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief thinking his reign of terror was finally over. But the Master Manipulator wasn't going away so easily. Later in the night, Edge attacked Kofi Kingston while he was making his entrance and took his spot in the World Championship Elimination Chamber match. When the night was over, Edge had lost a world title and won another within a span of 3 hours. The stage was set for another epic clash between Cena and Edge. It looked like the most iconic rivalry of the Ruthless Aggression era was finally going to get its WrestleMania spotlight. Except there was a twist. WWE inserted Big Show into the match, turning it into a triple threat. Show had been caught in a love triangle with Edge and Vicky on SmackDown, and he wasn't about to let Cena and Edge settle things without him. At WrestleMania, the three collided in a hard-hitting affair. But in the end, it was Cena who overcame the odds, capturing his 5th World Heavyweight Championship and bringing the title back to Raw. However, Edge wasn't finished yet. He invoked his rematch clause at Backlash, and this time it was a last man standing match. Cena fought valiantly, but towards the end, Big Show appeared out of nowhere and chokeslammed Cena through a spotlight. Cena laid motionless, and Edge stole the victory. The World Heavyweight Championship was returning to SmackDown once again, but Edge's celebration was about to be cut short by a certain charismatic enigma. Jeff Hardy had ended 2008 on top of the world, finally capturing his childhood dream when he won the WWE Championship at Armageddon. But 2009 would prove that staying on top was far harder than getting there. Hardy's first major challenger was none other than Edge. The rated R superstar wanted to reclaim what he believed was rightfully his, and at the Royal Rumble, he got his chance. In a shocking turn of events, Hardy lost the championship when his own brother Matt interfered and cost him the match. The betrayal was gut-wrenching. The Hardy brothers had been fan favorites for over a decade. They'd won tag team gold together, stolen shows with ladder matches, and shared countless memorable moments. But jealousy had been eating away at Matt. He was tired of living in his younger brother's shadow, tired of watching Jeff get all the glory while he fought for scraps. At the Royal Rumble, that jealousy exploded. Their brother versus brother feud consumed the first few months of the year. Matt claimed Jeff was selfish, reckless, and undeserving of his success. Jeff just wanted to understand why his own flesh and blood would stab him in the back. The Hardys collided multiple times throughout the spring. Matt got the win at WrestleMania, but Jeff got his revenge at Backlash. However, Jeff couldn't focus solely on his brother. He still had championship aspirations, and Edge was now holding the gold after defeating Cena. At Judgment Day, Hardy challenged Edge for the title, and just when it looked like Jeff might recapture the gold, Matt Hardy interfered again. The assist allowed Edge to retain, leaving Jeff frustrated once more. Finally, at Extreme Rules, everything came together. Jeff defeated Edge in a brutal ladder match, his specialty, to win the big gold. The charismatic enigma was back on top, but his celebration lasted all of about 30 seconds. CM Punk's music hit. The Second City Saint walked down the ramp with his Money in the Bank briefcase, the same one he'd won at WrestleMania months earlier. Hardy was exhausted, broken, barely able to stand. Punk cashed in and within minutes became the new World Heavyweight Champion. Jeff's moment of glory had been ripped away in the cruelest fashion possible, and this led to the most heated rivalry of the summer on SmackDown. CM Punk was the straight-edge superstar who preached about living clean, about avoiding drugs and alcohol. Jeff Hardy had a well-documented history with substance issues. Punk used this against him, constantly berating Hardy for his past mistakes, calling him a failure and a bad role model for kids. They traded wins throughout the summer, and finally, at SummerSlam, they met in a tables, ladders, and chairs match with the World Heavyweight Championship on the line. In a shocking outcome, CM Punk defeated Jeff Hardy to retain his title in what many considered Hardy's signature match type. But the feud didn't end there. SmackDown wasn't big enough for the two of them. Punk and Hardy faced off once again on an episode of SmackDown in a loser leaves WWE steel cage match. Punk won the match, forcing the charismatic enigma to leave the company. Fans were devastated, kids were crying, and Jeff's glorious run had come to an abrupt end. The backstage reason was that Hardy needed time to heal from injuries, but the real story was darker. WWE chose not to renew his contract when it expired a few months later due to continuing substance abuse issues. Jeff Hardy's meteoric 2009 had ended not with glory, but with a painful goodbye. Had Jeff stayed with the company, he could have main evented WrestleManias and even become the face of WWE. To this day, it remains one of the biggest what-ifs in wrestling history. But before we get too deep into the summer chaos, we need to rewind back to WrestleMania 25 when two legends created magic. The Undertaker's WrestleMania streak stood at 16 wins. For nearly 2 decades, nobody had been able to defeat the dead man at the Showcase of Immortals. Legends had tried and failed. Champions had fallen before him. The streak had become as iconic as WrestleMania itself. But now The Undertaker faced his most dangerous challenge yet, the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels. This wasn't just another match. This was symbolic. Heaven versus hell. The showstopper versus the phenom. It was a dream encounter between two of the greatest performers in WWE history, and somehow it exceeded every expectation. Leading up to Mania, HBK had outsmarted the dead man at every step. Taker had never defeated Michaels one-on-one in a big match situation. It looked like HBK had the psychological advantage. But when it's the night of WrestleMania, The Undertaker becomes something absolutely mythical. For 30 minutes, the two legends delivered perfection. Near falls had the crowd on their feet. Signature moves were countered. Finishers were kicked out of. At one point, The Undertaker attempted a dive to the outside, but the move went horribly wrong. He came dangerously close to landing directly on his head in what could have been a career-ending situation. Michaels nearly won by countout as the dead man struggled to make it back into the ring. Michaels hit sweet chin music flush, but Undertaker kicked out. Taker hit the tombstone, but it wasn't enough. Every 2 count felt like it could be the one to end the the streak. The Houston crowd was losing their minds with every passing moment. In the closing sequence, Michaels attempted a moonsault, but The Undertaker caught him midair and drove him down with a thunderous tombstone piledriver. As Michaels lay motionless in the ring, The Undertaker slowly rose to his feet. Both men had left everything they had out there. The match received universal praise from critics and fans alike. It set an impossible standard for every Mania match that followed. Even today, many fans consider it the greatest WrestleMania match of all time. But while Taker and HBK were stealing the show, Randy Orton was trying to literally end careers. Remember when we thought the Age of Orton was over after Triple H beat Randy at WrestleMania? Well, that didn't last long. At Backlash, just weeks after losing the championship, Orton found his way back to the top. In a six-man tag team match, a pre-match stipulation stated that if Orton pinned Triple H, he'd become champion. And that's exactly what happened. The Viper was back on top. The Age of Orton was upon us once again. But Randy's second reign would be short-lived. At Extreme Rules, Batista defeated him to capture the championship. However, 09 Orton wasn't going to stay down so easily. If he couldn't beat you in a match, he would simply put you out of action. Randy and Legacy attacked Batista, broke his arm, and forced him to vacate the title. With no champion, WWE held a fatal four-way match, and once again, Randy Orton emerged victorious. This third reign would prove to be his longest of the year. Orton successfully defended against Triple H, finally putting their feud to rest in a brutal 3 stages of hell match. But as one rivalry ended, another was about to heat up. John Cena had moved on from his battles with Edge and Big Show, and now he had his sights set squarely on the WWE Championship. His feud with Orton dominated the second half of 2009. At SummerSlam in August, Orton used every dirty trick in the book and walked out as champion once again. Finally, at Breaking Point in September, Cena defeated Randy Orton in an I Quit match to capture the WWE Championship, but Orton invoked his rematch clause immediately. At Hell in a Cell inside the demonic structure, Orton regained the championship in controversial fashion. The rivalry reached its epic conclusion at Bragging Rights in October with a 60-minute Iron Man match. For a full hour, Cena and Orton battled back and forth, trading falls and punishment. At one point, Randy even tried to blow up Cena with pyro, but the GOAT won't stay down. In the final moments, with the score tied, Cena locked Orton in the STF, and the Viper had no choice but to tap out. John Cena stood tall as champion, and their legendary 2009 rivalry had finally reached its conclusion. But 2009 wasn't just about main event rivalries. Throughout the year, other compelling stories unfolded. DX reunited and had an epic feud with Legacy that included a Hell in a Cell match, a submissions match, and HBK and Triple H even had an epic TLC match against Jerry Show. Speaking of TLC, the December pay-per-view delivered one of the biggest shocks of the year. Sheamus, a relative newcomer who'd only been on the main roster for a few months, defeated John Cena in a tables match to become WWE champion. The year also saw The Undertaker reclaim the World Heavyweight Championship, CM Punk's transformation into one of the company's top heels, Chris Jericho and Rey Mysterio's entertaining feud over the IC title, and Kofi Kingston's brief run in the main event scene before Randy thought he was stupid. While fans remained divided about 2009, the year proved that WWE could still deliver great stories, shocking moments, and unforgettable matches even with the PG restrictions. In fact, this would end up being WWE's hottest year before the magic of 2016. But before we get there, we gotta revisit WWE's weirdest year ever. A year that saw the WrestleMania main event end in a countout, when Raw would regularly be interrupted by this. When Mark Henry and Big Show broke the ring. When Rey Mysterio became WWE champion just to get wrecked by Super Cena on the same night. When R-Truth started talking to his imaginary friend. When everyone found out that Kevin Nash was still somehow alive. And we also got whatever the hell this was. Bruh. I've been a wrestling fan for almost 30 years, and I can tell you without a shadow of doubt that 2011 was the weirdest, most bipolar, and most schizophrenic year in WWE history. You'd have a banger like Triple H versus Undertaker, and the next moment, Snooki was doing cartwheels in the ring. You'd have Edge's retirement making you all emotional, and the next moment, Michael Cole was trying to get Jerry Lawler to lick his feet. On one hand, you had CM Punk delivering the pipe bomb, but then you'd turn around and have Kevin Nash trying not to blow out his quads on Raw. And these are just some of the wild antics WWE was throwing at us in 2011. It felt like the company couldn't decide if it wanted to be Game of Thrones, Breaking Bad, or The Truman Show. So what exactly made 2011 the weirdest year in WWE history? What were the baffling moments, storylines, and creative decisions that turned Monday Night Raw into an unpredictable fever dream? And how did a company manage to produce the most exciting angle in a decade and some of the most embarrassing television in the same year? let's take a trip down memory lane and relive the insanity that was WWE in 2011. The year kicked off with WWE building toward WrestleMania 27, and right from the start, something felt off. The Rock had returned to host WrestleMania, which should have been a huge deal on its own, but instead of letting that moment breathe, WWE immediately jumped the gun. Rock and Cena immediately started tearing into each other, and the seeds were planted for their Mania encounter, which was more than a year away. This meant the actual WWE Championship match at this year's show was treated like a meaningless obstacle in the way of the real story. The Miz was the champion heading into WrestleMania 27, and WWE made him feel like such an afterthought that most fans probably forgot he was even in the main event. The entire build focused on Rock and Cena trading insults, while Miz stood awkwardly in the background like a third wheel on a date. But when WrestleMania finally arrived, the main event somehow managed to be even worse than the build-up. The biggest show of the year, the main event for the most prestigious championship in wrestling, ended with both guys lying outside the ring while the referee counted to 10. But wait, it gets worse. The Rock, serving as guest host, restarted the match to give the fans a proper ending. Except his idea of a proper ending was hitting John Cena with a rock bottom, allowing The Miz to crawl over and pin the company's top babyface to retain the championship. So not only did the main event end in a non-finish, but when it was restarted, the face of the company got screwed in the middle of the ring to set up a match that was more than a year away. The message was clear. This WrestleMania didn't matter. The Miz's reign didn't matter. All that mattered was planting the seeds for Rock versus Cena next year, and everything else was just filler. After this disaster, The Miz went from WWE champion to a mid-card comedy act within months. But while the WWE championship picture was a mess, the World Heavyweight title scene on SmackDown was going through its own identity crisis that somehow managed to be even more confusing. In 2011, we got the biggest Rumble the company had seen to date. Instead of 30, you had 40 men in the Rumble, and honestly, it was pretty dope. You had John Morrison becoming Spider-Man, you had some cool returns, and in the end, it was Alberto Del Rio winning the Royal Rumble, earning himself a shot at Edge's World Heavyweight Championship at WrestleMania. This should have been a straightforward story, but in 2011's WWE, nothing could be that simple. Edge successfully defended his title against Del Rio at WrestleMania, which was fine, but then, just days later on April 11th, Edge came out on Raw and dropped a bombshell that nobody saw coming. After years of neck problems and multiple surgeries, doctors told him that one more bump could leave him paralyzed or dead. Just like that, one of the greatest performers of the generation was gone. The announcement came out of nowhere, and it left SmackDown without a World Heavyweight Champion. WWE decided to hold a ladder match at Extreme Rules between Christian and Alberto Del Rio for the vacant title. And in a feel-good moment, Christian, Edge's best friend and longtime tag team partner, finally won his first World Heavyweight Championship after 16 years in the business. It was a beautiful story. Fans were happy for Christian. It felt like WWE was rewarding his dedication and giving a deserving veteran his moment in the sun. And then Vince McMahon killed it 5 days later. On a random episode of SmackDown, just 5 days after winning the championship, Christian lost the title to Randy Orton. No build, no story, just Vince apparently deciding that Christian wasn't championship material and taking the belt off him immediately. What followed was months of Christian begging for one more match against Orton, getting title shots, losing, begging for another one, losing again, turning heel out of desperation, and still losing. Christian and Orton had good matches together, but the whole angle felt like WWE was punishing Christian for having the audacity to win the championship in the first place. The whole SmackDown title scene in 2011 perfectly captured WWE's inability to commit to anything. Edge retired, Christian became champion, then Randy dethroned him, then Mark Henry dethroned Randy, and by the end of the year, we had half a dozen title changes. But as chaotic as the title scene was, it wasn't even close to being the weirdest thing happening on WWE television. For that, we need to go back to the absolute circus that was WrestleMania 27. WrestleMania 27 wasn't just bad because of the main event. The entire show felt like WWE had completely lost the plot on what their biggest event of the year should look like. Michael Cole, the commentator for Raw, had turned heel months earlier and started feuding with Jerry Lawler. At WrestleMania 27, this feud somehow got almost 20 minutes of ring time. Daniel Bryan versus Sheamus for the United States Championship got cut from the main show entirely and relegated to the pre-show because WWE needed time for Cole versus Lawler. Stone Cold Steve Austin was the special guest referee, which should have made it fun, but instead it was just painful to watch. Two commentators took up a quarter of an hour on WrestleMania, while actual talented performers either got bumped to the pre-show or didn't make the card at all. But the feud didn't end there. At Extreme Rules and Over the Limit, Cole and Lawler continued their rivalry with more bizarre stipulations and more mind-numbing matches. But somehow, this wasn't even the most bizarre part. Snooki from Jersey Shore, a reality TV star who had never trained as a wrestler, got a prominent spot on the WrestleMania card. She teamed with John Morrison and Trish Stratus against Dolph Ziggler and Lay Cool. And not only was she on the show, but she got the winning pin. WrestleMania 27, which was dubbed as the biggest WrestleMania of all time, ended up being an absolute clown show with just 2 good matches. The anonymous Raw general manager was still a thing too, with a laptop that would ding and send emails to Michael Cole. That was until the latter half of 2011, when this buffoon took over as Raw GM. Over on SmackDown, Cody Rhodes broke his nose and became undashing. Kane and Big Show were goofing around. You had a fake Obama show up at Capital Punishment. Sin Cara kept botching his entrance. And between Cole's glass cube, a laptop running the show, and Hornswoggle dancing with the Great Khali, early 2011 felt like WWE had become a full-blown cartoon show. But then, something happened that changed everything. In June 2011, a disgruntled wrestler sat down cross-legged at the top of a ramp and delivered a promo that would make everyone forget about Michael Cole's glass cube and remember why they loved wrestling in the first place. On June 20th, 2011, CM Punk sat down cross-legged at the top of the entrance ramp and delivered what would become known as the Pipe Bomb, an unfiltered rant that felt more real than anything WWE had done in over a decade. He called out Vince McMahon. He buried Triple H's politics. He mocked John Cena's merch machine. He name-dropped Ring of Honor and New Japan Pro Wrestling. He mentioned Colt Cabana. And he revealed that his contract was expiring on July 17th at Money in the Bank, and he was planning to leave WWE with the championship. For the first time in years, wrestling felt unpredictable again. Was this a work? Was it a shoot? Was Punk actually leaving? The internet exploded with speculations, and fans couldn't look away. Money in the Bank in Chicago became one of the hottest tickets in wrestling history. Punk challenged John Cena for the WWE Championship in his hometown, and the atmosphere was electric. When Punk hit the GTS and pinned Cena in the middle of the ring, the building exploded. He grabbed the championship, blew a kiss to Vince McMahon at ringside, and left through the crowd like a folk hero escaping with stolen treasure. It was perfect. Absolutely perfect. Punk had the belt, his contract had expired, and he was free. WWE had created a storyline that existed both inside and outside their bubble, and fans were completely invested in where it would go next. But then, the company panicked and ruined everything. Instead of letting Punk stay gone for months and build the mystique, WWE brought him back after just 8 days. Instead of letting the story breathe and keeping fans guessing, they immediately shot themselves in the foot and made Rey Mysterio look like a clown in the process. At SummerSlam, Punk beat Cena to unify the championships, which should have been the ultimate triumph. Except immediately after winning, Kevin Nash, who hadn't been relevant in years, ran in and attacked Punk for no clear reason. Then Alberto Del Rio cashed in his briefcase and won the title, ending Punk's reign after less than a month. The summer of Punk that should have been a career-defining run became a confusing mess involving Kevin Nash texting himself, Triple H putting on a suit, and Punk getting lost in a corporate conspiracy storyline that nobody understood or cared about. By Night of Champions, instead of being WWE champion and leading a revolution, CM Punk was losing clean to Triple H. But while WWE was busy killing CM Punk's momentum, they were also stumbling into another weird situation that somehow captured both the insanity and entertainment value of 2011. 2011 gave us one of the most bizarre and weirdly entertaining pairings of all time. After losing a #1 contender match, R-Truth snapped, turned heel, and started smoking at ringside and ranting about conspiracy theories. Truth started talking to an imaginary friend named Little Jimmy, accused the audience of plotting against him, and poured drinks on fans in the front row. He wore Confederate soldier hats, spoke in paranoid rants, and acted like a man who had completely lost his mind. It was absurd. It made no sense. But somehow Truth committed so hard to the character that it actually worked. However, Truth wasn't the only person in WWE who was a victim of conspiracy. The Miz, who played a supporting role in his own Mania main event, joined forces with Truth, and the two became obsessed with the idea that there was a massive conspiracy keeping them out of the main event. They started attacking Triple H, they caused walkouts, invaded pay-per-views, and generally made life hell for WWE's corporate structure. At Vengeance in October, Triple H booked himself in a tag team match against Awesome Truth. His partner was none other than CM Punk, the same guy who 3 months earlier had been the rebellious anti-hero fighting against everything Triple H represented. Now Punk was partnering with the boss to fight guys complaining about not getting opportunities. It was bipolar booking at its finest. The year ended with CM Punk finally winning the WWE Championship at Survivor Series and beginning what would become a historic reign. Daniel Bryan cashed in Money in the Bank to win the World Heavyweight Championship at TLC. Triple H and Kevin Nash ran it back like it was 1995. Kane returned with a new mask. Cena and Rock teamed up at Survivor Series, and the Great Khali was somehow still employed. But while WWE in 2011 was weird, 2016 would be the company's final great year. When AJ Styles made his shocking debut, when the Shield went to war, when Shane McMahon jumped from the top of the cell, when Chris Jericho started putting people on the list, when the brand split reignited a war between Raw and SmackDown, when Goldberg destroyed Brock Lesnar in 90 seconds. And these are just some of the moments that defined the unforgettable year of 2016. From a creative standpoint, 2016 was the year WWE finally felt exciting again for the first time in almost half a decade. The year delivered dream matches, surprise returns, and one man in particular would arrive from the independent scene and go on to dominate the main event. But what made 2016 so special? What were the feuds, the debuts, and the creative decisions that revitalized pro wrestling's momentum? Let's turn back the clock and revisit the greatest year in modern WWE history. Our story starts in January at the Royal Rumble. Heading into WrestleMania 32, WWE's top card was looking seriously bleak as stars like Cena, Rollins, and Orton were all out of action due to injury. Roman Reigns was defending his WWE Championship inside the Rumble match itself, battling the entire roster in one night. The crowd was hostile, the atmosphere tense, and when the countdown hit 0 for the number 3 entrant, everything changed. AJ Styles, the man who had defined TNA wrestling for over a decade, the man who had made his name all over the globe from New Japan to Ring of Honor, stepped onto a WWE pay-per-view stage for the first time in his career. At 38 years old, many wondered if Styles had missed his window. Vince had a reputation for burying talent he didn't create, and the company's track record with outsiders was mixed at best. But from the moment Styles locked eyes with Roman Reigns, it was clear something different was happening. Over the following weeks, Styles quickly aligned himself with Chris Jericho, forming an unlikely partnership that showcased his personality and in-ring brilliance. The two worked seamlessly together, trading victories and building chemistry until their friendship inevitably crumbled. At WrestleMania 32, Styles and Jericho collided in a match that, while solid, left fans worried. Styles lost clean, and the whispers began about whether this was another case of Vince refusing to elevate an outsider. But those fears were quickly erased. Just one night after WrestleMania, Styles won a fatal 4-way #1 contenders match, earning himself a shot at Roman Reigns' championship. Suddenly, the Phenomenal One was in the main event picture. At Payback, Styles and Reigns delivered a hard-hitting encounter that proved Styles belonged at the top of the card. He lost, but the performance mattered more than the result. The rematch came at Extreme Rules, this time under no-holds-barred rules with the help of Luke Gallows and Carl Anderson looming. Once again, Reigns retained, but the matches had accomplished something crucial. They'd established Styles as a legit main event player in the WWE, and then came the feud that would define Styles' year. John Cena returned from shoulder surgery in June, and when he crossed paths with the Phenomenal One, the reaction was deafening. These were two men from completely different worlds. Cena, the PG superhero. Styles, the indie darling who had conquered every territory except this one. Styles mocked Cena's corporate image and questioned his passion for the business. Cena fired back, claiming Styles had spent his entire career in the minor leagues. At Money in the Bank, the two finally met in the ring, and Styles did the unthinkable. He beat John Cena. The win felt monumental. A passing of the torch moment that legitimized everything Styles had accomplished outside WWE. But more importantly, it proved that WWE was willing to invest in him. Following the brand split in July, Styles was drafted to SmackDown, and his rivalry with Cena continued at SummerSlam. Once again, Styles emerged victorious in what many considered the best match of the night. By the time the referee's hand hit the mat for 3, AJ Styles had cemented himself as one of WWE's top stars. But Styles wasn't finished. In September at Backlash, he defeated Dean Ambrose to capture the WWE Championship within 8 months of his debut. For the remainder of 2016, Styles carried SmackDown on his back, defending the title against Ambrose and Cena in a series of excellent matches that proved his reign was no fluke. What made Styles' 2016 run so remarkable wasn't just the speed of his ascent, it was the fact that WWE allowed him to be himself. The company didn't try to change his moveset, his personality, or his presentation. They trusted him, and he repaid that trust by delivering at every opportunity. By year's end, AJ had gone from an uncertain debut to WWE champion, proving that he was what he always claimed to be, simply phenomenal. But while Styles was conquering new territory, 3 former brothers were on a collision course that had been building since 2014. The Shield had been unstoppable. Roman Reigns, Seth Rollins, and Dean Ambrose had dominated WWE as a unit before Rollins turned his back on his brothers, shattering the Brotherhood with a chair shot heard around the world. For 2 years, the three had traveled separate paths. Rollins became a corporate champion before injury took his title away. Reigns was pushed as the face of the company despite fan resistance. And Ambrose, the scrappy underdog, had clawed his way into relevance through sheer determination and charisma. At Extreme Rules, after Reigns retained his championship against Styles, the arena fell silent. Rollins made his return from his devastating knee injury and made his intentions clear immediately, laying out Reigns with a pedigree. The architect had returned, and he wanted what he'd never lost. What followed was a slow-burning build to the match everyone had been dreaming about since 2014. At Money in the Bank in June, Reigns and Rollins went to war in a near 30-minute classic that showcased their chemistry. Rollins won the title back, reclaiming what injury had stolen from him. But the celebration was short-lived. Dean Ambrose had won the Money in the Bank contract earlier that night, and as Rollins celebrated his hard-fought victory, the lunatic fringe struck Rollins with the briefcase, and in a moment of poetic justice, pinned the man who broke the Shield to become WWE champion. The tables had turned. The man who had been left for dead by Rollins in 2014 now stood tall with the gold. But the real story was what happened in those 10 minutes. All 3 Shield members had held the gold on the same night, and it meant one thing was now inevitable: the Shield triple threat. At Battleground in July, the 3 finally collided in the match the fans had been begging for. And when Ambrose scored the pinfall to retain his championship, it felt like the end of a chapter that had defined wrestling for over 3 years. And with the WWE Championship now heading to SmackDown with Ambrose, the landscape of the company was about to change forever. On July 19th, WWE pulled the trigger on an idea they hadn't touched in 5 years: the brand split. Raw and SmackDown would once again operate as separate entities with exclusive rosters, championships, and creative directions. The draft saw Stephanie McMahon and Mick Foley take control of Raw, selecting stars like Roman Reigns, Seth Rollins, former NXT champion Finn, and Charlotte Flair. Meanwhile, Shane McMahon and Daniel Bryan built SmackDown around Dean Ambrose, AJ Styles, John Cena, Bray Wyatt, and Randy Orton. The split immediately injected new life into the weekly television shows. For the first time in years, both shows mattered. SmackDown Live, rebranded with a new blue aesthetic, embraced its underdog status. The show was dubbed the Land of Opportunity, and they proved it by giving fresh matchups and overlooked talent a chance to shine. Styles dominated SmackDown as WWE champion, but the show's strength came from its depth. Heath Slater, who went undrafted, turned his desperation into comedy gold, begging for a contract on both brands before finally winning the SmackDown Tag Team Championships with Rhino. The Miz transformed the Intercontinental Championship into a prestigious prize, delivering promos that reminded everyone why he was one of the best talkers in the company. His rivalry with Dolph Ziggler at No Mercy saw Ziggler put his career on the line, and the match delivered an emotional classic that elevated both men. Meanwhile, Randy Orton's slow-burn descent into the Wyatt family provided SmackDown with a psychological thriller. Talking Smack, the post-show hosted by Daniel Bryan and Renee Young, became must-see as the unscripted promos created viral moments that sometimes overshadowed the main show itself. The Miz's infamous promo tearing into Daniel Bryan for calling him a coward became one of the most talked-about segments of the year. Raw, on the other hand, struggled with identity issues early on. The Demon King made his main roster debut and faced Seth Rollins for the inaugural Universal Championship at SummerSlam. The match was excellent, and Finn's victory felt like the dawn of a new era. But sadly, a shoulder injury during the match forced him to vacate the title the very next night. The Universal Championship eventually landed on Kevin Owens after Triple H turned on Seth Rollins. Owens' reign, while criticized by some, gave birth to one of the year's most entertaining dynamics: the friendship between Kevin Owens and Chris Jericho. The two became inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and creating comedy gold with the List of Jericho. What started as a gimmick with a clipboard and a pen became one of the most over acts in the company. The Red brand also reintroduced the Cruiserweight division, hoping to recapture the magic of the Cruiserweight Classic tournament that had aired earlier in the year. TJ Perkins became the inaugural champion, and stars like Rich Swann, Cedric Alexander, and Neville joined the roster. Unfortunately, the division struggled to connect with live crowds, often treated as a bathroom break rather than a showcase of athleticism. The women's division on Raw became defined by the rivalry between Sasha Banks and Charlotte Flair. The two exchanged the Raw Women's Championship multiple times throughout the year, even delivering the first ever Women's Hell in a Cell match in October. By the time Survivor Series arrived in November, both brands had established distinct identities. The pay-per-view was built around brand supremacy, with Raw and SmackDown going head-to-head in a series of matches. The men's traditional 5-on-5 match was chaotic, with SmackDown pulling off the victory. But the real shock came in the main event. Goldberg had returned to WWE after 12 years away, and his opponent was Brock Lesnar, the beast who had ended The Undertaker's WrestleMania streak. The build promised violence. Instead, it delivered stunned silence. In 86 seconds, Goldberg destroyed Lesnar with 2 spears and a jackhammer, ending the match before it truly began. The man who had dominated WWE for the last 2 years had been squashed in under 90 seconds. But while the main roster was experiencing its renaissance, WWE's developmental brand was having the best year in its history. NXT had already proven itself as a legit third brand by 2015, but 2016 was the year it truly became must-see. As stars like Finn, Sami, Owens, Bayley, and Sasha Banks graduated to the main roster, new faces arrived to fill the void, and NXT didn't miss a beat. On April 1st at TakeOver Dallas, the wrestling world witnessed something special. Shinsuke Nakamura, the king of strong style from New Japan Pro Wrestling, made his WWE debut against Sami Zayn in a match that is still replayed to this day. The entrance alone, with Nakamura's theatrical charisma, set the tone. When Nakamura hit the Kinshasa for the victory, it was clear NXT had just signed its next megastar. Bobby Roode debuted with his glorious entrance that became an instant phenomenon. Samoa Joe, already established as a monster, captured the NXT Championship and began a reign of terror that saw him become the brand's first 2-time world champion. The women's division, led by Asuka's seemingly unstoppable run, delivered classic after classic, but perhaps no match in 2016 better exemplified NXT's commitment to wrestling excellence than DIY versus The Revival at TakeOver Toronto. The 2 out of 3 Falls tag team match felt like it was pulled straight from the dream of a wrestling purist. Other stars like Austin Aries, Andrade, Ty Dillinger, and Sanity brought their own unique flavor to the delicious recipe of the black and gold brand. NXT in 2016 wasn't just about great matches, though. It was about purpose. Every storyline made sense. Every character had clear motivations. The shows were tight, efficient, and never wasted a moment. While the main roster sometimes stumbled with overproduced segments and questionable booking, NXT felt like pure wrestling. It was a reminder that sometimes less really is more. It's a shame that Triple H hasn't been able to replicate the same magic on the main roster. But in 2016, NXT had firmly established itself as more than just a developmental territory. It was a proving ground for the future, a haven for wrestling fans who craved quality, and a brand that could stand shoulder to shoulder with Raw and SmackDown in terms of importance. But beyond the headlines and championship reigns, 2016 was filled with moments that reminded fans why they loved wrestling in the first place. Shane McMahon came back after 7 years away and immediately threw himself off the Hell in a Cell at WrestleMania because, well, that's what Shane does. His partnership with Daniel Bryan as SmackDown's leadership became one of the year's most enjoyable dynamics. Enzo and Cass brought their infectious energy to Raw, Braun Strowman emerged from the Wyatt family's shadow and began his transformation into a monster. The New Day continued their record-breaking reign as tag team champions, Becky Lynch won the SmackDown Women's title, the Usos finally turned heel, and most importantly, wrestling felt fun again. It truly was a phenomenal year in WWE, and perhaps the best year for the company since 2008.